Hey, Bitcoin wealth builders. Welcome to episode 87 of Bitcoin Hard Talk. Today, the main topic is going to be there's something that people have debated back and forth, and I'm going to be covering it more in the geopolitical section. Firstly, we'll do this week in Bitcoin, this week in macro, and this week in geopolitics. And the proof of weapons network was in full force, with the proof of work network really ushering in the peace to combat the weapons that were fired by the fiat currency debt-based Ponzi scheme. But many people are confused by the question of, does America control Israel or does Israel control America? And if you're familiar with my content, you'll know that this has been a back and forth debate. But I'm going to clear it up once and for all, and never was it more clear than this week, so that the real perpetrators of the genocide in Gaza can be correctly assigned rather than scapegoated. We're going to be covering all of that and more. And so if you are new to the show, welcome to Bitcoin Hard Talk episode 87. This is where we break down everything that happened this week in Bitcoin, this week in macro, and this week in geopolitics. We do it in 3 parts, and we're going to start with this week in Bitcoin as we transition to this world of Bitcoin, AI, and central bank digital currencies. So today we're going to be covering a little bit on the progress towards the US market structure bill. We're also going to be discussing the impact of the Federal Housing Finance Agency new policy, as well as the IMF, and also the 25% correction in hash power that happened exactly as the US was striking on Iran, and what we can read into that. This week in macro, we're going to be covering the Fed, we're going to be covering oil, we're going to be covering tariffs, and of course, we're going to be doing an update on the debt rollover, the $10 trillion debt rollover that the US has to go through this year. This week in geopolitics, we're going to be answering the question, does Israel really control America? And we're going to be going through the path to ceasefire and all the theatrics. If you watch the last 2 episodes of Bitcoin Hard Talk, you'll know exactly what was going to happen this week. And it happened exactly as we said, with a few little exceptions. And we'll go through all of that this week in geopolitics. You would have been on the right side of the oil trade. You would have known that it was market manipulation, and you would have known that the whole thing was scripted, drafted, and theatrics, because we covered exactly what would happen by following the money. And that is what we do at Bitcoin Hard Talk. We get you ahead of everything by following the money. So without further ado, let's jump right in to Bitcoin Hard Talk, episode 87, part 1, this week in Bitcoin. So the big announcement today was that the crypto market structure bill is basically coming soon. And so the crypto market structure bill is designed after the Genius Act. So we've had the Genius Act implemented, which is stablecoins. The reason that that took precedent over everything else is because it is clearly, if you've been watching Bitcoin Hard Talk, a long-term strategy for sucking up and dumping the last bits of US debt onto the American people so that the technocrats and the Trump administration can profit from the high interest rate yields as a result of rolling over the debt-based Ponzi scheme after the tariff policy that reset the world order into the multipolar world order that we've been covering for an awful long time. Well, after the Genius Act, once you got the stable coins covered, you'll have probably some radical monetary type of policy that we'll be covering more in the macro section. But after that, market structure. Market structure essentially means who's going to be regulating who. Is the SEC going to be regulating certain crypto assets as securities? Is the CFTC going to be regulating certain commodities, whether it be Bitcoin or other assets? And what about, the OCC? Is it going to be treated as a currency under the Federal Reserve structure? We shall see. This is what the Market Structure Act is set to do. And it gives clarity on exactly how you can engage with the Bitcoin and crypto market within the US regulatory framework, whether exchanges need to register as money service businesses. Do they need to register with each of the 52 states? Is it going to be done at the federal level? Is there going to be exemptions if it's treated as a currency, commodity, security? All of that is to be clarified. And that is all coming up in the market structure bill. The line of events that is meant to happen, and this is the one thing, if you remember way back when I said why you should vote for Trump over Genocide Joe and Holocaust Harris is because, firstly, you need to punish them for the genocide, but everything will continue in the same because it's BlackRock and the Proof of Weapons Network that set the policy. But from Trump, you will get a different environment with Bitcoin, which allows you to free yourself and boycott the Federal Reserve. You boycott the Federal Reserve by saving in Bitcoin rather than saving in dollars. And when you save in Bitcoin, you can boycott BlackRock by holding it in self-custody. And when you hold it in self-custody, if your wealth increases over time by owning more Bitcoin each month, you can at some point decide whether you want to pay down your debt. You boycott the banks by paying down your debt. And you boycott the global proof of weapons corporate structure by spending local. And so Bitcoin allows you to slowly free yourself so that then you can free your companies and your corporations. And eventually, when the proof of weapons network implodes upon itself, maybe you can have bit bonds and various other corporate structures that many of the countries, for example, the Kingdom of Bhutan, which now has 50% of its GDP in Bitcoin, thanks to its Bitcoin mining strategy by utilizing its geo energy, based upon its water and dams and various other things. And we're going to be covering exactly how it also protects you from any type of, if you need an insulated economy like Iran, we're going to be going through how I think that's happening and how you can remain sovereign despite what outside aggressors may be trying to do to you. And that's the whole point here. Sovereign individuals, sovereign corporations, and sovereign countries, so that we can actually move to an environment of competition rather than global hegemon, and we can defang the proof of weapons network that requires a debt-based Ponzi scheme to fund never-ending forever wars and just all the atrocities and crimes against humanity that is required in order to prop up the dollar and make the debt fuel Ponzi scheme roll, while it also implodes upon itself and creates civil unrest in America, civil unrest in UK, backed by the Bank of England, civil unrest in the European Union, backed by the European Union, civil unrest around the world, backed by the International Monetary Fund, the World Bank, and the Bank for International Settlements, and countries that resist against it by remaining sovereign and resisting a debt-based Ponzi scheme inflicted by the Bank for International Settlements, why financial weapons of mass destruction are thrown around the world by the policies of the Financial Action Task Force. In this deconstruction, this weaponization of the post-World War II order that was set up at Bretton Woods. Well, anyway, at the same time, the director of digital assets says that the US is committed to passing crypto market structure legislation by September. So this is the one thing where I think the Trump administration has been completely on point. Why? Because Trump is hedging against the dollar as he invests in this multipolar world through investments across the Middle East, loans from ICB China to build Trump towers around the world, and short the dollar and go long Bitcoin, as through World Liberty Financial, he loads up on all the Bitcoin mining, Bitcoin ETFs, so that he can personally enrich himself as we transition to turning America into a surveillance, one big beautiful bill, Palantir-controlled technocracy that you need to protect yourself with Bitcoin, and at least you can do it in self-custody. Don't own it with BlackRock, own it for yourself. By September, it is a race to accumulate as much Bitcoin. Work hard, earn as much fiat currency as you can. Your job will be over by artificial intelligence in the next decade, if not sooner. In the next 5 years, I'm already starting to see many of the companies that I've invested in over 100 different companies over the time. They are replacing their developers with artificial intelligence as we speak. That is a global trend. You need to prepare yourself. You need to accumulate with your fiat currency as much Bitcoin as possible. And you need to own more Bitcoin this month than the previous month. And you'll have the proof of work to protect yourself from the violent proof of weapons network that is imploding on itself. And we're trying to just avoid World War III. Fortunately, because of the theater, we'll cover this more in part 3. I think we've avoided World War III, but you need to protect yourself in the transition, just as Trump is protecting himself and his family by shorting the dollar, issuing stable coins, and going long Bitcoin. So Trump says that he wants the legal framework for crypto on his desk immediately. In fact, quote, "Get it on my desk ASAP, no delays." So Trump knows that he wants that through, and this is going to be his legacy on top of what we're going to be covering in the geopolitical section. Obviously, if you followed, you know the real story, because we follow the money and understand the power structure of the world, and that the Trump administration simply works for the proof of work weapons network, which is control of the deep state. The deep state is under the military industrial complex, and the military is one faction of the financial industrial complex, big pharma, the consumer, and the tech side, which is all managed through the large asset managers like BlackRock, State Street, and Vanguard, which get to use the Federal Reserve, and the Federal Reserve shareholders, the banks that sit underneath it, they get to create digital dollars every time they issue a loan. And so through AI like Aladdin that's controlled by BlackRock, you can control monetary policy at the Federal Reserve level, and you can also control fiscal policy through the software that's being used at the Treasury level, as well as all the large capital flows, as every fund manager and money manager and endowment fund in the world and hedge fund uses the same technology to push out the same signals as they meet every single week in Bilderberg at the World Economic Forum meetings, just like they did a couple of weeks ago. Go down the list and you'll see who runs America, who runs UK, who runs EU, and they are pushed against in this multipolar world. And you can just see the real power structure of the world. But at the same time, now with this transition into a world of Bitcoin, AI, and CBDCs, the US Federal Housing Finance Agency has been ordered Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac, and Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac are the government-led debt-based Ponzi schemes that try to get as much mortgages out there so that banks can profit from issuing the dollar, and they get to create money every time they issue a mortgage, and it's guaranteed by certain deposits in the FDIC, which, by the way, FDIC only has 1% of the entire deposit market insured. 99% is covered by the government. The government means that they can socialize the losses, privatize the gains, and you have organizations like Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac to pump the debt-based Ponzi scheme and steal more money from the average American person owned over to those that own the assets, which is creating this generational divide between the boomers and Generation X that is causing civil unrest right now, and also is going to be leading to this ginormous wealth transfer. As the elder boomer generation pass away and pass on their wealth, those people are Bitcoiners. They're crypto people. They spend in stable coins. They invest in artificial intelligence. They save in Bitcoin. What do you think they're going to do when they receive that multi-trillion-dollar redistribution of wealth from those that that didn't get into Bitcoin and made all their money on their housing? They're going to be selling. They're going to be buying Bitcoin, and they're going to be using their Bitcoin and crypto reserves as part of their wealth effect, based upon savings rather than a debt-based Ponzi scheme. This is the intergenerational wealth transfer, and you need to make sure that you're on the right side of this. So Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac, when assessing whether to lend to you and what your credit rating previously, they didn't consider your Bitcoin or crypto assets. So if you had your Bitcoin in self-custody, then they wouldn't consider that as part of your net worth in assessing whether you are mortgage ready. Now, most of the Bitcoiners that I know, they end up saving in Bitcoin. And because Bitcoin every 4 years, if you add more Bitcoin every month, has outperformed every hedge fund, every money manager, all the stock markets, all the bond markets, gold, real estate, every asset class, the assets of the rich and wealthy, because it has beaten all of them, hedge funds, venture capital, they tend to just end up buying their houses outright. But sometimes they don't want to buy their houses outright because they want to keep the Bitcoin. Well, now you can apply for a mortgage, and they've ordered Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac to assess you, not just based upon your traditional assets, but your Bitcoin and crypto assets as well. This means essentially that the categorization of Bitcoin and crypto will just manifest its way down through the banking system, But there is a bit of a honey trap that you need to be aware of. The honey trap is that while the US housing agency may allow crypto assets in mortgage qualification, it looks like that the Bitcoin has to be held in custody. So they want you to hold it either through the BlackRock Bitcoin ETF, or they want you to hold it in Coinbase where they have it in custody for it to qualify. So they're not allowing, in the initial phase, for your self-custody to be counted. And so obviously this is a centralized honeypot trap, which also means that it doesn't matter too much. It means that when you've got your Bitcoin in self-custody, if you want to qualify for a mortgage and have your assets considered, add to your Bitcoin each month. And once your net worth is worth a certain amount, you can take some of your self-custody Bitcoin, deposit it to a platform like Coinbase, and then you can get a statement, and then they can assess your ability to take on a mortgage based upon the amount that you have in Coinbase. It does not mean that you should be storing your Bitcoin with a custodian. It means that you should be developing the self-sovereign strategy, because if the US ever does in a Great Depression what it did in 1933 and decides that it says US people can no longer own gold, guess who they're going to come after first? They're going to say, here's some central bank digital currency, or here's some Trump stablecoin, USD1, or here's some Circle USDC, and you have to convert your Bitcoin into our strategic reserves, and you receive some stablecoin. Now, I'm not saying that will happen, but the first place they will go is after the custodians, which is why you want your self-sovereign, self-custody. And if you don't like the policy of your country, you can get the hell to any country that you like and bring it with you just by remembering your phrase in your head, because Bitcoin is fully transportable, fully auditable, fully digital as you choose. And that is the beauty and the power of not being connected to one country's policy. But anyway, you'll be able to use it. So this really helps with the categorization. It means that it will probably start to be used within all the different types of systems, as well as banks putting it on their balance sheet and various other things that are coming. But obviously they want your Bitcoin, and you want to be self-sovereign and only put it in their system for the amount that you want to use. So what else did we have this today? Well, we often quote one of the big platforms that people use as an indicator of how people are thinking is a crypto prediction market called Polymarket. During the election, it becomes really, really popular as a gauge in which people predict, whether who the next president might be, what the results of election will be. I used it throughout the war as well to talk about the prediction of whether the US would strike Iran and various other markets that they put together. Now, it tends to be a little bit biased towards the crypto bros, and the crypto bros, if they're Bitcoiners that watch Bitcoin Hard Talk, they tend to be a bit more switched on, because if you follow my show, you follow the money, and you understand the corruption of the proof of weapons network. You're not just that normal person that watches Fox News and CNN or falls for the Mockingbird CIA operations when they took over the media and pay influencers like Mossad agents like Laura Loomer, who want to spread false propaganda to make you feel a certain way so that you end up on the wrong end of the proof of weapons network. And then you beg for Palantir on open border policies, thinking that these things, open border policies, mass deportations. We must need Palantir to protect the border because there's these Hamas jihadi terrorists that are coming through the border. You don't fall for any of that stuff. You know who funds the different groups. You're very familiar with that because you watch what we cover in part 3. Follow the money tells you the truth, completely different area. But so when you're doing Polymarket, now personally for religious reasons, I do not gamble. It's strictly prohibited for me. But there is a platform that I use in order to gauge what other people are thinking. And it has got a lot of traction. So it was announced today that they just raised $200 million in a funding round, which was led by the top venture fund, Founders Fund. Who is Founders Fund? Founders Fund is Peter Thiel. Who's Peter Thiel? The US military industrial complex Mossad agent that was selected as the PayPal mafia in order to create technology for military surveillance, including Palantir. How was Palantir funded? From funds based upon his funder, Jeffrey Epstein. So the proof of weapons network is coming around, and guess what it's investing in? Founders Fund is investing in market prediction crypto poly market. What do you think that $200 million is for? In order to manipulate the data, in order to control outcomes, so that it can be a tool of the proof of weapons network and the surveillance state that Palantir is ushering in. Follow the money, and you'll find out that that prediction market is about to be weaponized against you and provide the data, just like the social credit score, that he is ushering in, beta testing his occupation as a service, genocide as a service technology in Gaza, the drone technology in Ukraine, and the civil unrest surveillance state in UK and EU that is about to come together into one big, beautiful bill that Trump is ushering in for Peter Thiel, all connected to Jeffrey Epstein, whether it be Elon Musk, whether it be Donald Trump, whether it be Peter Thiel, all in the same network that is building the surveillance state in America. And guess what? You are cheering, make America great again. And Trump is building the network, and it doesn't matter. Trump is Trump. It's the same under Biden. It's the same under Obama. It's a unipolar, technocratic, and you're meant to believe the presidents are there to give you a narrative that makes it acceptable. Of course, that is what it's all about. So you can tell by following the money, the larger agenda. So poly market, $200 million from Founders Fund. All right, what else happened in the Bitcoin and crypto market? Well, GameStop raised another $450 million. They said this is potentially to buy more Bitcoin. And so GameStop is becoming, they've got over $5 billion on the balance sheet. And now they've raised another $450 million. What else did we have? One of the early companies that I invested in many years ago, Circle, they recently went public. And interestingly, their market capitalization is now, or it went greater than Coinbase. Now, what's a bit strange about that is that the Circle issues the USDC stablecoin. It's the second largest stablecoin, but it's launched within America. And within America, it's actually issued through a partnership with Coinbase. And so while if you want, exposure to stablecoins, then you have to buy Circle, because it's the only publicly traded company that is a pure play stablecoin company. But even though Coinbase receives much of the profits from USDC, Circle was so popular after the IPO, one of the most successful IPOs that I've seen for a long time, that now its market cap is bigger than Coinbase. And it's even bigger than USDC stablecoin itself. So the market is valuing it very highly. Just before the IPO, it got an investment from BlackRock. When BlackRock invested, that is the assumption that they're going to put a lot of assets behind it. What else is happening? Obviously, we've got Genius Act coming through. We've got the debt crisis. The debt needs new markets. Do you think stablecoins are going to be used in order to back some of the debt? I think so. Everything's moving in that direction. And those in the know, those that, BlackRock got ahead of it, and those in the know are purchasing and overvaluing relative to Coinbase, the Circle stock. So do with that information as you choose. But as stablecoins grow, we're probably going to reach the point where, how you have these different measures of money supply. You have M0, which is, the money that's held at the Federal Reserve by the banks. And then you have like M1, which involves all the cash equivalent deposits. And then you have M2, which includes, various other highly liquid money market funds. And then as you go to M3, it includes more exotic instruments, which are less liquid, including many of the less liquid money market funds. And then you have M4, which includes all the shadow banking and various derivatives. And you really can't measure money because money is debt in a debt-based Ponzi scheme. But what happens when you start issuing these stable coins? I'm pretty sure that eventually you're going to have maybe like a new M0.5 or M5, which measures the amount that is in these stable coins. And then because what happens with these stable coins, essentially what happens is somebody takes $1 from the fiat currency proof of weapons network. They deposit it with the stable coin issuer. the stablecoin issuer then issues the equivalent of a digital dollar on a blockchain that you can then spend on, basically, rather than like a bank deposit where it's a guilty until prove innocent system. You have to prove everything before you can spend it. Stable coins can be taken out of the platform and then used as an innocent until proven guilty system. So you can spend it. There's obviously surveillance. Everything can be seen on a blockchain. The stablecoin issuer can freeze the coins if it chooses, but you can spend them freely. And so you get this innocent until proven guilty system. Now, what do they do with the money? Well, they basically lend it to the US government by buying treasuries, and then they can invest it in different things. But as they receive a yield on those investments, once stable coins like Tether, they buy Bitcoin. So they get like a free Bitcoin position on the back of the debt-based Ponzi scheme, and they get a free investment by issuing this digital dollar on a blockchain. And so that's the model. And so you can imagine, as more and more stable coins get issued, now the Genius Act is through and this starts going global, and you have this new money supply measure of the stable coins, you can imagine that the ratings agencies like Standard & Poor's and Moody's and S&P, they're going to start issuing, statistics and ratings based upon all these different stable coins. And as more people start to share the yield, people are going to start accepting stable coins, receive yield in real time. There'll be different grades. You can make them interoperable. And then as more and more merchants start accepting them, why would you use a bank? This is where it's all going. And this is why the technocracy is trying to take it over. And then they're using the data with artificial intelligence to build up that social credit score to integrate with this. Then those crypto assets will be available for you to use as part of your credit rating when you're trying to borrow those stable coins against it. And if you've watched previous episodes, you'll know why I tell you Bitcoin, self-custody, and how they're building up a massive infrastructure using the Federal Reserve's Operation Choke Point 3.0, let's call it, through Cantor Fitzgerald and other deep state actors in order to try and end up with as much of your Bitcoin as possible. Go through previous videos. The banks want your Bitcoin and various other ones on my YouTube channel if you want to understand more about that. Okay, right. There was another big event this week. Now, we'll cover more about this in the GeoPolitics, but we had the theater of the US putting strikes on Iran, and immediately I was following the market. So when I was live on all the spaces, everyone was said, we're going to World War III. I said, we're not going to World War III. In fact, the price of oil has gone down 8% while this strike has happened. This is all theater. Everybody knew about it. That is in the need to know, and it is designed to scare the shit out of you so that you can usher in the big, beautiful bill and sign up for a surveillance state. So I was calming people down as this was happening, telling them the truth, and people were getting really angry at me. How dare you say my country would not engage in anything like this? This is World War III. Israel controls America, and they're going to pull America into the war, and this is going to be World War III. And I was saying, calm down, calm down, calm down. This is very, very predictable. And all the Bitcoin hard talk people were saying, yeah, we saw that one coming. And the market was telling us the truth. We were following the money. Everybody was following the media. The people in the media were having a hernia thinking we're going to World War III. And anybody in Bitcoin hard talk, we were kind of laughing behind the scenes as people were panicking. Anyway, what else did we notice? Well, if you are following, we always talk about proof of work. And proof of work is the security network that backs up Bitcoin. It is the world's largest distributed supercomputer in the world. And it exists where people mine Bitcoin in China, America, Europe, Iran, Russia. It's distributed all around the world. Some of the African nations, Latin, Central, South America. And it's distributed around the world, which is why no one can shut it down. And no one country controls it. You have nodes where everybody backs up a copy. You can run your node. It's trivial to run it. And you can verify your own transactions and remain completely sovereign. I recommend you do that as we get deeper and deeper into this world. But by looking at the hash power, we can start to get clues by following the money that others aren't following. Well, anyway, Iran's Bitcoin mining industry it may be bigger than some of us thought. It's been reported often, but we don't really have the exact information. But really, it's fueled by the fact that Iran is an energy, it's got its own oil supplies and various other access in the Middle East to LNG and various other things. And so in the Middle East, they have access to the cheapest electricity and gas. And at the same time, when you sanction a country like Russia and Iran, which are the two most sanctioned countries in the world, you tend to need something internal to fuel your economy. And while you're fueling your economy, remember Iran and Egypt joined BRICS, which is led by China, and Russia is currently, part of that network. You tend to put yourself in a position where if you fuel your internal economy on Bitcoin, and then Russia started announcing that it's launching Bitcoin structured product bonds, and you can bet your bottom dollar that China, which produces ASICs, Taiwan, which produces the chips for Bitcoin mining, and America, which produces 40% of the energy through curtailment and its efficient use of the energy grid in order to utilize wasted electricity. And when there is more demand, there's subsidies that pay for the Bitcoin miners to mine less, and you can manage all of your electricity grid. You can bet your bottom dollar that the countries in the Middle East already have vast Bitcoin strategic reserves. And from the people that I know, I can tell you that that's true as well. They're just not announcing it. But this is also fueling into GCC trade and into BRICS trade. And so they are trading using Bitcoin as the mechanism for clearing rather than using the US dollar. And through this barter network that was created through BRICS, a de-dollarization process, we've now got $1 trillion of inter-BRICS trade that's happening. And you've got these internal Bitcoin mining networks that are allowing for this inter-Bitcoin trades that are happening as well. But there is a bit of a downside for certain countries. Obviously, Bitcoin mining is backed by a lot of electricity. Now, once you've got a very efficient network like Texas has, you can really utilize Bitcoin mining to manage the electricity grid and make your electricity way more efficient. But we haven't seen such types of things within Iran yet. And so Iran suffers from electricity shortages and various other things as well. But it seems like a lot of energy has been used by Iran in Bitcoin mining because it has these power shortages. Now, while we're negotiating, remember I talked about last week, one of the targets of Israel was the Iranian crypto exchange, where it stole 15 million Iranians' money, a civilian attack, in order to try and do part of its civilian targets. While they're suffering power shortages, could this be nuclear energy? And so I've always talked about how this is not about nuclear weapons. We'll go through more of that in the geopolitical section. This has always been about nuclear energy, powering artificial intelligence, Bitcoin mining, and various other technology plays. And obviously, we know how the proof of weapons network, they create a whole story around how they're building a bomb and they're trying to implement Sharia law to take over the world. This is all narrative, just as anyone that follows the money knows. And so those shortages is why that we're starting to see that. But as they do more and more Bitcoin mining, we know from one of the public companies in America is a company called Terra. And nothing to do with Terra Luna, the Ponzi scheme that was created to back a stablecoin that lost $60 billion of market value. But Terra Wolf, which is, they basically turned a nuclear power plant into a Bitcoin mining operation. And they could mine for approximately 2 cents while everybody else was on about 4 cents. So that is an incredible achievement, but it doesn't scale. You've got to scale those nuclear power plants. What does the Middle East want to do? What does Iran want to do? What does the whole region want to do? What does America want to do? What does China want to do? What was Germany doing? But before BlackRock decided to vassalize Ukraine and destroy Europe by switching off nuclear energy in Germany, what did they do? Well, they were all trying to harness nuclear energy. So nuclear energy connected to Bitcoin mining can stop those power shortages. Again, this is a tool of sanctions in order to destroy an economy and make it where you can have uprisings against your leadership, because you have to engage in all these different types of networks to get things flowing as well. Well, anyway, this is what it's all about. It's about energy. So as we started to see, the news broke that essentially the US was bombing Iran's nuclear facilities, we suddenly, at the very same time, had a global, the global Bitcoin hash rate, which is completely measured. It's always at new all-time highs, but we had a plummet in the amount of hash rate that was backing the Bitcoin network. In fact, the Bitcoin hash rate dropped approximately 200 exahashes. To put that in context, Bitcoin is about 1,000 exahashes. That's about 1 quadrillion maths problems per second globally, in order to secure this network that no government can shut down in this distributed supercomputer that verifies all the transactions without a need for a central bank. 25% of the network is a staggering 25% of the network that went down in approximately 24 hours. Now, this is also a great beta test of how anti-fragile Bitcoin is. It takes any situation, and the way Bitcoin is designed is if you have a sudden drop in hash power, that can lead to delayed transactions, and transactions go into blocks every 10 minutes. And it may take longer than 10 minutes to verify those transactions, but every 2 weeks, the difficulty rate adjusts. A difficulty rate is how difficult it is to mine a Bitcoin. That's the reward for the Bitcoin miners. Every 10 minutes, they receive a Bitcoin subsidy for mining Bitcoin. They act as central bank in a decentralized way based upon code that nobody can change, so that you know the exact monetary policy and there's no human intervention. Well, if you get a drop in 24 hours of 25%, you're going to have some difficulty rate adjustment, and then it will bounce right back based upon plugging in that security somewhere else, because it creates in those 2 weeks the opportunity for excess profits. And from the miners that are still mining, and the ones that were shut down, they get they get the hit. And if they can't sell enough Bitcoin to cover their electricity costs, it's a very efficient industry. I used to be involved in Bitcoin mining about 2013, 2014. We were running a very large operation in Iceland. And at one point, the electricity became more than the country could spare. But we backed it up by a Bitcoin mining bond, which ended up being one of the highest returning investments, beat the hell out of all of the different bonds. We launched that in 2014. Interestingly, there was a presentation this week from some of the traditional TradFi players that wanted to launch Bitcoin bonds as a mechanism for paying down the US national debt and backing it by an equivalent asset in Bitcoin, which is very interesting to see as well. Okay, well, anyway, this wasn't a normal fluctuation in hash power. This was a massive, and it was basically, it was an event that it lined up perfectly with what happened on the military strike. So not all of the 25% reduction in hash rate could be attributed to Iran, because at the same time, there was droughts and power shortages and curtailment happening within Texas. So there was a need for Texas energy, which led to, because I'm a shareholder in some of the mining companies, those that were, you know that many of those mining companies do this curtailment trade where they get paid in order to stop mining to fulfill some of the energy needs of Texas. Well, so you can't basically attribute everything to Iran, but a portion, I think, certainly was attributed because it lined up almost exactly. So if we know, and I said at the time, if that hash power comes back online, then we know that many of the rumors that I'll be covering in the geopolitical section and the evidence that was provided is that this is theater. Because we know that much of the enriched uranium was actually moved ahead of the actual bomb. And I'll cover that more in the geopolitical section. But I said one of the ways to knowing is if that hash power comes right back on. Now, obviously, some of it can be attributed to the cartelment in Texas, but this would be an indication that the mining can just happen. And so, therefore, this is many of the theatrics I've been predicting. And this is the most basically obvious implication that Iran, the strikes from the US, they could have impacted the hash rate in Bitcoin, and they could have been using this nuclear energy to power some of the Bitcoin, which gives them a big advantage, which means that they may have a much, much bigger Bitcoin reserve than we can imagine. And it's probably vastly bigger than the 2% that has publicly been estimated. So it's been estimated that 2% of the Bitcoin mining happens in Iran. I think it could be a lot more. And it also plays to the fact that it came back on. So, not shortly after, the hash power came right back up, and the 25% hole was plugged immediately. So I reckon that they've been likely mining in the shadow for years, just as many other have in the Middle East. And I reckon countries like the GCC and Qatar and Saudi Arabia, I reckon they build up a lot more Bitcoin strategic reserves than you can imagine as well. Which implies that if the GCC are building up, if BRICS are building up, and they're now doing trades in Bitcoin, then America better get its Bitcoin strategic reserves. What's its priority? Firstly, it's doing stablecoins so it can handle the national debt, back some of its debt by stablecoin. Then it's doing market structure so it can start to figure out who's regulating who. Then it's meant to be doing Bitcoin strategic reserves. All in that meantime, what are all the technocrats doing? What is everyone? They're loading up in Bitcoin. People think that this is the top of the market. There is always Bitcoin as it reaches now a $2 trillion market cap, and gold is the number one asset. Bitcoin is now the 6th largest asset in the world. We even had Nvidia became, behind gold, the largest asset in the world. Nvidia powers artificial intelligence, and now you got Microsoft, Apple, Google, and various other ones behind. Bitcoin is bigger than silver market cap. So now you have gold, number one asset in the world, Nvidia, number two, artificial intelligence, all the companies that are building the robotics infrastructure and the AI, artificial intelligence infrastructure, then Bitcoin, then silver underneath it, and Saudi Aramco. You can see where the world is going. If you follow the money, energy, artificial intelligence, when all those jobs goes, what are they going to do? Stable coins, universal basic income, and those more authoritarian countries like European Union and UK and various other countries like China who have their central bank digital currencies. Follow the money, you get ahead of it. How do you protect yourself? Save in Bitcoin, own more Bitcoin this month than the previous month, put it in self-custody, and you can protect yourself from all of this. The countries that need protection, they're building their Bitcoin strategic reserves. As this power play happens, you're going to see countries shift in power based upon Bitcoin reserves. Companies that are protecting themselves from bankruptcy by owning Bitcoin treasuries. Individuals that are protecting themselves from the bankruptcy of the fiat currency proof of weapons network that are using Bitcoin strategic reserves as individuals. States like Texas saving their electricity grids based upon cartelment and having a Bitcoin mining industry. Countries like Iran and Russia using bonds in order to protect themselves as they engage in these proof of weapons network things. Protecting themselves from sanctions in Iran using Bitcoin mining. Countries like China using Bitcoin with the BRICS network in order to settle trades and power the various aspects. If you cannot see where this is going by now, then I don't know what else to say. You're just not watching and paying attention on Bitcoin Hard Talk. You need to pay attention further. This is digital, hard, sound money that is going to be the protection in a world of Bitcoin, AI, and central bank digital currencies. So what else did we have? Well, some of the companies, the public companies that do Bitcoin mining, CoreWeave, basically one of the Bitcoin mining companies, they're buying Core Scientific. Core Scientific it used to trade on the Canadian Stock Exchange. It now moved over to the American Stock Exchange, and now they are merging. That led to a 33% increase in price. Now, I'm not saying whether you should own Bitcoin miners. It is a very, very hard business. I was involved in that a long time ago. It's a very efficient business. Yeah, so I'm not saying whether you should invest in mining companies or not. You know, what I've found, in fact, is that Bitcoin miners, they tend to be mechanisms to play in the debt capital markets and the equity capital markets to enrich the executive teams. The compensation and stock options are through the roof. And so it's a very hard business to manage. You have to raise money at the right time. You're involved in the trade war because your ASICs comes from China. You're involved in the shortages from ASIC chips. So you have to get the Taiwanese trade to be working. That relies upon rare earth minerals. You then have to have access to the cheapest electricity. If you're doing it in America, you can benefit from curtailment in managing electricity. But you basically have to get the equipment plugged in. When there's a nuclear competition, that's going to be very tricky for the miners to manage. They're also integrating with artificial intelligence infrastructure so that data centers that are providing energy for big compute and AI also can mine. It's an amazing industry. It's a great one to watch, but it's a very tricky business to manage in terms of those trade flows, timing, and everything in Bitcoin is all about speed of execution, timing, and therefore you have to raise in the debt capital markets. And they tend to issue the executives too much stock options based upon their ability to manage it. So anyway, right, what else have we got? So a couple of more stories in the Bitcoin section, and then we'll move over to this week in macro. Oh, we had some updates. So over in March, the International Monetary Fund, the economic hitmen. If you haven't read John Perkins' book, Confessions of an Economic Hitman, that helps you understand what the IMF is for. The IMF is a terrorist organization that is designed to push the dollar around the world for the proof of weapons network by covert regime change and working with the deep state, the CIA, Mossad, and MI6 in order to create war, death, and destruction so that you can vassalize countries. You can use financial weapons of mass destruction and hedge funds in order to take over their capital markets, get them addicted to dollar debt, and then you can deplete their reserves of local currency so they become a full vassal state, and you can control countries. This has been the American colonial playbook since it took over the British Empire. But the economic hitmen at the IMF have now decided that they can't ignore it anymore. They have now officially classified Bitcoin as a capital asset. Now, what does it categorizing as a capital asset actually mean? Well, it means that it is a non-produced asset. It means that it's not created, like a company or anything like that. It is more like a natural asset, and it is a non-financial asset. So they're treating it like a commodity. Basically, by categorizing it like this, they're treating Bitcoin in the same way they treat gold and land. That means that in the future, if central banks want to use it as their reserves, this is the type of categorization that is needed. It's basically recognize that Bitcoin is decentralized in nature. And because there isn't an issuer, unlike all other cryptocurrencies, which have a pre-mine, a foundation, you can control it by owning the stakes through proof of stake. They have classified Bitcoin's proof of work as decentralized, a commodity-like feature, a lack of no issuer, and so therefore they think that is the type of reserve asset that if a central bank wanted to hold it, they could also hold it as a reserve asset. Now, I'm not aware of any central bank that's doing that at the moment. I do know that the Czech Republic central bank was looking to do that as part of an investigation. I'm not sure if it got, but this distinguishes it basically from all other crypto assets and stablecoins, which are essentially classified as what they're called financial instruments. In the European Union, a financial instruments means that you have to comply with MiFID, Markets in Financial Instrument Directive, but there's also one that's bespoke for crypto assets as well. So anyway, this is the International Monetary Fund recognizing Bitcoin's decentralized nature and recognizing that you basically have to adjust to this new commodity that exists. That's the financial and economic hitmen at the IMF couldn't beat us, so they had to join us. They obviously also threatened any country like El Salvador that wanted a Bitcoin policy, and made sure that they got enough dollar loans so that they could try and add conditions to any Bitcoin policy. But if they just had accumulated enough Bitcoin, they would have remained sovereign and they wouldn't need to have bowed down to the economic hitmen that caused their civil wars, funded guerrilla warfare, and created so much death and destruction that led to a gang takeover of the country so that America could get it addicted to dollars, dollarize the economy, and steal all of its resources and overthrow its country as it does all around the world. But a country that was not colonized by America was the Kingdom of Bhutan. And it is protecting itself from being colonized by China because now half of its GDP is held in its Bitcoin. And it has got a very innovative Bitcoin mining industry and operation that harnesses its dam and energy that can be produced by wave and water power. And so congratulations to the Kingdom of Bhutan. You have, I think, successfully protected yourself and remained sovereign by harnessing all the power of Bitcoin combined with natural energy in order to get half of your GDP. I believe that that will protect you from the International Monetary Fund economic hitmen should they ever try to attack you, or even if you wanted negotiation power with the China Belt and Road Initiative. And that is the model that is open to every single country in the world, should they choose it. And that is the transition that we're going through. And that is why there is so much more to Bitcoin than meets the eye right now. Now, you need to make sure that you own more Bitcoin this month. You boycott the Federal Reserve by owning it in self-custody to boycott BlackRock. When you need to pay down your debt, you can boycott the banks by increasing through a wealth effect. And you can boycott the global network of surveillance by working, earning, investing, spending in local and build those community systems so that we can use the Bitcoin model to have decentralized identity, decentralized artificial intelligence, decentralized internet, decentralized money as we have with Bitcoin, and all of the tools that we can build around it in order to produce this resistance against centralized control through command and control of the surveillance state, where Palantir and social credit scores get integrated into many of these centralized stablecoins and central bank digital currencies. And that's everything that happened just this week in Bitcoin. We'll be back next week. So now we're going to move over to part two. In part two, we're going to be covering this week in macro, and we're going to be focusing on the debt rollover strategy, the updates in tariffs, the pump and dump that happened in oil, and where we go next. So let's jump straight into part two this week in macro. Right, immediately we saw, hold on, just before we get started, I forgot to say, we are just 750 people away on YouTube from hitting the 100K milestone of subscribers. If you watch my video and you like this content, I need you, if you're not a subscriber, to go over to YouTube right now, hit the subscribe button, hit the bell symbol, hit all. We have been shadow banned for a long time, but we're hitting a critical mass through organic sharing. Once we hit 100K, YouTube will do a review. And because I think the content that used to be way more controversial is coming true, I reckon they'll unshadow ban me, but I need your help to get to 100,000. And I need more people to be protected. So please share this content. That's helping me organically get to 100,000. And do me a favor. I think that if you hit the subscribe button, even if you're subscribed already, then hit the bell symbol, then hit all, you'll start getting those notifications again. And you will start actually receiving the content. And that will help us get the rankings that's needed in order to protect more people as we transition to this world of Bitcoin, AI, and CBDCs. Now, just in case that review leads to me getting banned altogether, I also stream these on X and all of my immediate updates. And if you want to interact with me, you can join me. You'll get a notification on X if you follow me, and then make sure that you put all so that you get those notifications every time I go live. Then you can join the space, you can ask me a question, and you can get everything that's happening in real time. If that all goes wrong, we stream it on Rumble. So follow me over on Rumble. I've got a tiny little following relative to X and YouTube. I'm over 200,000 on X, 100,000 approaching on YouTube, and then I think we got under 1,000 on Rumble. But that's going to be the backup plan. So follow me over there. And if all goes wrong, make sure that you go to simondixon.com and you get my newsletter and you create your free membership to the Bitcoin Hard Talk membership portal. Where everything is completely free. You can get a digital copy of my book, The Great Depression of the 2020s video series, where I forecasted in 2009, I uploaded that video, Great Depression of the 2020s, told everyone how I'm investing in 2019. And you can get that, and those rules apply as well. I'm going to be doing a review in 2026 of how those strategies worked and what changed based upon what happened. And you'll be the ones that get that in the Bitcoin Hard Talk membership portal. It's completely free. Get yourself a username and log in. And then you also get an email every week to make sure you don't miss a thing. So with that in mind, let's move over to part 2, This Week in Macro. I'm going to take a little bit of a water break. Now, what I'd like you to do while I'm doing that is hit the like button, hit the bell symbol, retweet this, repost this, do me some favor, because I need more and more people to watch this content. Welcome back to Bitcoin Hard Talk, episode 87, part 2, This Week in Macro. Right, so we started this week essentially by Trump officially saying and signaling that a trade deal with China is coming. That pumped the market up to new all-time highs. So the old strategy is essentially happening. We also had Scott Bessent, the Treasury Secretary. He came that he's basically focused on the big deals, which is a deal between China and America and China and India, i.e. the two biggest and largest populations and economies behind BRICS, and obviously India being the fastest growing economy in the world right now. We've benefited from his partnership with China, with Russia and China. And although China and India have their beef, they're still doing much trade, and it's an important relationship. And with Russia, they were able to get gas and oil to Europe via India, and India is able to take advantage of these sanctions. And then there was the beef with Pakistan because the Proof of Weapons Network is selling vast weapons while India is producing its own weapons. It also is buying vast weapons from Lockheed Martin, General Dynamic via the BlackRock portfolio companies in order to gain their little bit of control over India. And China is competing with the International Monetary Fund through Pakistan. And so that was all about vassalizing Pakistan more into China and vassalizing India more into the Proof of Weapons Network, so that as BRICS rises, they can use India as the host nation. And we started to get a little bit more signals that Pakistan will be backing up Iran if this ever goes nuclear. And that was much of the narrative that was happening, because they wanted to come after Pakistan next as part of that BRICS trade and to vassalize Pakistan into China partnerships, because BlackRock is hedging against US. It's using US as the host nation for its surveillance state, its Mach 7 technology companies, its energy play for artificial intelligence and robotics, while it gets capital outflows through the tariff policy implemented by Trump, which has the impact of pushing everyone closer to BRICS, while Trump negotiates the deals so that the companies, the corporations in the BlackRock portfolio all benefit from all of the trade deals. As companies go bust, just like COVID, they can acquire the distressed companies, and the export-driven countries can also be pushed closer to BRICS and also get acquired into the large multinational corporations that have their stock prices in US. It's consolidation of wealth, a movement over from Main Street to Wall Street, and the ushering in of a multipolar world. And so we had the trade war that happened first, even though this was really, China had already won the trade war. And this was the execution of the result. And then we had the deal that we're having with Iran and Israel right now to reset the world order. And I'll be covering more of that in the geopolitical section. But Scott Percent was saying that it's focused on China and India, i.e. the deals the BlackRock portfolio companies and large multinational corporations need in order to get their control over ports, various other things. Like it was negotiating. BlackRock controls about 26 different ports, even the Panama Canal. That was Trump negotiating for BlackRock because America has been vassalized and controlled, as Europe and UK, by the large multinational corporations that have invested in this multipolar world. But we didn't really hear anything on what was going to be happening with Canada. They said that basically we're focusing on the largest economies first. So European Union next. They've already announced that they've done a deal with UK. Nothing burger to it. And so the market really at this stage is not taking tariffs seriously. The damage is done. The relationships have been reset. The impact of tariffs has not been fully understood in terms of inflation yet. And that was reflected with the Federal Reserve statements, which we'll be going through today. But the market just doesn't take it seriously. I think it just believes everyone will move to 10%. And the US is just a volatile country to work with, and everybody should be hedging their bets. That's the end result. Meanwhile, the large concentrated wealth in the US stock market went up to new all-time highs, as I said it would, as more and more small business gets consolidated into large corporations, as well as those trade routes globally. So everything happened as if you've been following Bitcoin Hard Talk. We talked about with the tariff policy, and in the geopolitical section, we'll cover the follow-on play. The market's basically saying we think it's going to be 10% or something. The damage is essentially done. BRICS won. The economy, basically transferred some wealth, and there's more and more to go. And the S&P hits new all-time highs. Right. That chapter is done. Now we're coming to the end of the deadline. Remember, he said we got 90 days. So you're going to start to see more and more market manipulation, as we have seen, as we end those days, and then a narrative around how do we extend if it wants to, because it hasn't had the full desired impact yet in terms of benefiting the large corporations. So my guess is that we enter into some kind of extension, more insider trading that creates volatility, and more concentrated wealth, as essentially the stock market is fully controlled by those top 1%, most of the stocks, I think over 50%, and the rest, the top 10%, and it's stealing wealth from everybody that doesn't own those stocks. But also, not only that, but the stock market is essentially, it's not the S&P 500. It might as well be the S&P 7 plus a few more energy and steel and different types of infrastructure that supports the tech companies. Because the Magnificent 7 stocks is essentially the top 10, the top 10% is almost the entire S&P. So you've now got anything where the stock market goes up, concentrates wealth into a smaller number of people, and concentrates wealth into a smaller and smaller number of corporations. The rest, screw you. We don't care about you. That's where the American economy is. Why? Because government is subordinate to the proof of weapons network. The proof of weapons network is managed by the asset managers like BlackRock. They set policy. They pay through lobby, military lobby, pharma lobby, banking lobby, APAC lobby, in order to get the policies that they need in order to concentrate wealth over to them. So we had comments from Jerome Powell at the at the Federal Reserve from the FOMC meeting. And as no surprise, as we said on Bitcoin Hard Talk, they did not cut rates. And the more important thing is what Jerome Powell was saying. It always is. So he's basically saying that he's not going to cut rates until we get back to 2% inflation. At the same time, the markets are predicting an 80% chance that by September, he cuts rates. So the market is different from what Jerome Powell is saying. I'm not sure. I think we've peaked in terms of the bottom of inflation. We haven't seen the full impact of tariffs, and I think that will lead to an increase in the price rates. Now, obviously, there's lots of manipulation around changing the classification of what's included in inflation all the time. But that aside, you can look at true inflation, or you can look at CPI, or you can look at the producer price, PPI index. Take whatever pick you want. It has been coming down, and it looks like this has bottomed, is my prediction now. So how can you cut rates? Because it's meant to be a tool for controlling inflation. Jerome Powell said he won't be cutting until the inflation is at 2%, and we're not there yet. At the same time, he had to do his testimony in Congress this week. And here's a little summary. Basically, he was saying and testifying that the ultimate tariffs level will determine, their impact. So if we don't know what the tariff level is, then we don't know what the impact is. And so if Trump does an extension on the tariffs and we get a wave of negotiations that will take longer to actually materialize, this is basically a destabilization campaign, as I've always said the tariff policy is, to reset the world order into multipolarity. But Powell was saying, I don't know what the impact of tariffs is until we've actually got what the tariffs are. So this is more and more kick the can down the road destabilization campaign. He also said at the same time, the US economy, the labor market, they remain solid positions as measured by the stock market, i.e. wealth concentration. That's why we're having lots of civil unrest campaigns on the street, as the rich get richer, the poor get poorer, as designed by the debt-based Ponzi scheme. He said also that long-run inflation is expected to be consistent with the 2% target. So he's expecting it to get back to 2%. I disagree. Maybe he knows things that I don't know, but I think this might be a narrative, because I think it's going to go up from here as we start to see the impact of tariffs. But he's managed to get that delay, that never-ending delay. So Trump will continue to say Jerome Powell is the biggest idiot in the world, that type of narrative. They both work for the banks, by the way. Jerome Powell is just a muppet for the banks that control the Federal Reserve, and Trump is owned by the financial industrial complex, and so he tends to be a deal maker for the financial side of the industry. But remember what I said last week, the Straits of Hormuz won't create the disruption. That would be a financial Armageddon. It would be a financial holocaust. It would disrupt the markets immensely. It would have a massive impact on oil prices. It would ruin the debt rollover. It would increase the long-term rates that America needs to borrow. But it can't actually practically happen, because if you were watching the geopolitical sections, you'll know that I was saying this is theater towards a coordinated outcome. And I'm doubling down on that, despite the fact, I'll go through that in part 3. But this week we had, in the theater, the Iranian parliament voted to close the Straits of Hormuz and said, but we won't do it. It's up to the Security Council in order to do it. So it was all rhetoric, and it was all part of that. Now, that was definitely part of an oil price manipulation campaign. Immediately, the price of oil went up, higher. They went up to a peak of about $78. So it was up over a few days, based upon the announcement. But it was never insiders. It was never so high up that it went up to like $100, $120 if it was treated as a credible threat. So the big money knew that it wasn't real, but the small manipulated money knew that it was real. And so they started buying, thinking that the price of oil will go up. The large institutional money knew no. The retail started buying based upon it. And every single time the price of oil sparks meaningfully, it basically means a recession follows. So we would expect that to be a big recession. It would be a correction in the market, but the market did none of that. The market wasn't pricing in any of it. So while everyone on the spaces was panicking, I was saying the market doesn't believe you. It doesn't believe that this is a real war. It believes that this is coordinated. It's market manipulation. Normally that would lead to, if the price of oil went up that far, you'd have a correction in the market. You'd have higher long-term rates. And that would happen faster than the short-term rates, which the Federal Reserve controls. That makes the cost of refinancing the American current economy greater. And anybody that listened to Bitcoin Hard Talk knew that it wouldn't happen anyway. So it was just other people that were buying oil based upon this news. Immediately, or not immediately, we had a correction of approximately 8% of oil. And that was happening as Iran was firing at the Qatari bases. So the price of oil was going down 8%, while Iran was escalating towards firing at US bases in Qatar. As I said, everybody else was saying Iran, US is about to go into, this is going to be World War III. US is about to go into war with Iran. Israel rules the world. And because Israel rules the world, is pushing America into war. And therefore, this is going to be firing at Qatar. And immediately the price of oil followed. I was telling everyone on X Spaces, none of that's happening. America's not going to war with Iran. Israel does not control America. Israel is a colony of America. And there is a bigger strategy that we've been covering throughout the months on Bitcoin Hard Talk. Not a US strategy, but a BlackRock strategy based upon being invested in BRICS and the GCC. So if this was real, the price would have gone up and shot up above $100. Now, you could interpret this that obviously because this is BlackRock's strategy, BlackRock knew how to manipulate through the hedge fund division of the financial industrial complex. If you believe that politics is in charge, Trump would have also known about it, and he would have leaked it to his financial buddies that may not have been involved in the inner circle of the military industrial complex. And so therefore, that is what led to the crash, because people were trading ahead, knowing that as Iran was firing at Qatar, which would normally be an escalate, which would pump the price, that an Iran peace deal was going to follow. And lo and behold, that's exactly what happened. And so the oil price predicted the whole thing, which gave the reinforcement for my geopolitical analysis that nobody believed other than the Bitcoin Hard Talk people that watch every week. The whole thing was pure theater, pure market manipulation, and that is a massive, massive volatility trade to the insiders and the proof of weapons network and the hedge funds that were making money at the expense of retail that was following the media and believed in the narrative. There was an announcement from Trump at the same time people were talking about. So, Trump has been building the strategic petroleum reserves in case, what happened with Biden is he started releasing in order to control inflation after the Ukraine-Russia invasion. And that's a real war, by the way. That's not a scripted war. That's a real one. It was a coordinated attack by NATO to draw Russia into it, but Russia's fighting a real war, and BlackRock is vassalizing about 60% of the country now, and Russia will have the rest. Zelensky is an agent for the military-industrial complex, and they're fighting to the last Ukrainian, while Europe pushes out a narrative that they're fighting for democracy and prints $850 billion, steals $300 billion from Russia. There's $1 trillion of revenue via NATO that goes into the proof of weapons network, and America gets to print a fake GDP saying we're growing while it's stealing all that money from its people through inflation and a big, beautiful bill. But anyway, Trump said that he's not going to be using any of the petroleum reserve, the strategic petroleum reserve, which means that the price of oil is over to OPEC and OPEC plus, which is led by Russia, Saudi Arabia, and various other countries. Last week, we reported as well that the result of this, because through this campaign, Israel had to close its port, Haifa, which was part of the strategic vassalization that I'll be covering in part 3. But that meant that Jordan and Egypt weren't receiving their LNG. This was a disaster for both Jordan and Egypt because they've been vassalized by the International Monetary Fund, which forces them to buy LNG from America's colony to prop up that economy, called Israel, which is a welfare state funded by America, where the money goes back to the military industrial complex and American corporations stolen from the people. And that's a part of, you have to subsidize the colony, which is why America over its years has spent over $400 billion. But through the wars, it brought in $10 trillion of revenue for the military industrial complex at the expense of the American people. But also, Iran had to stop exporting some of its resources to Iraq. And we know in Iraq, American bases in Syria and Iraq occupy the oil, and America funds the communist Kurds there in order to make sure that they can economically destroy Syria. And obviously that's led to what the dirty wars and the civil wars and the ISIS invasion, which is funded by Western powers like USAID in order to destabilize economies so that you can take over those and occupy those resources. But anyway, those by the end of that, because the ports in both Israel and Iran were put back on, it avoided disaster, but they had approximately 2 days to fill the gap, and it would take 10 days to source those resources from somewhere else. So it was going to be a big problem. Another reason why there was kind of scripted progress there, because I think everybody in the region, including the GCC, including Jordan, including Egypt, including Iran, including the military industrial complex, including Saudi and various other parts, they all knew what was happening here. It was a scripted, managed transfer, as I'll be covering in part 3 and have covered for months now. But immediately, it was funny what came after that announcement. There was a really strange tweet, or not tweet, Truth Social post. Trump came out and said that China can now continue to buy oil from Iran. That's really interesting. This is the first admission that sanctions no longer work, and America's okay with that process. Because Trump might as well work for BRICS at this stage. He has been the best BRICS salesman and policy salesman in the world, because we know he's controlled by the financial industrial complex represented by BlackRock as the CEO that is invested in this GCC, multipolar, and BRICS world. Everything that Trump has done has been ushering in this artificial intelligence surveillance state within America, protecting themselves with Bitcoin and supporting BRICS. He's like a BRICS salesman at this stage. Because China, essentially, Trump has done more for BRICS than the USA at this stage. And I believe that is by design when you follow the money and follow the power structure. As I said, it would have taken 10 days to fix those oil supply routes, but this had to be ended sooner. And also at the same time, when you go through the money in Israel, this could never have been a long extended thing. And I'll go through the numbers, and I'm even going to do something fun this week in part 3. I'm going to price the numbers in Bitcoin, because I want you to always price things in Bitcoin. That's how you know the stock market is crashing, when in dollar value it's going to new all-time highs. Price it in Bitcoin, real estate's going down. Gold has had a little spike up, but it's been in general going down relative to Bitcoin. And all of the markets have been going down relative to Bitcoin in the long term. And so all of that, that's why I'm going to be doing that in part 3 as well. Anyway, there were more processes announced in the destabilization campaign. You've got this fight between the Federal Reserve and Trump that continues to escalate. Trump said that he's going to be announcing the new Fed chair soon. He did more and more comments around what an idiot Powell is and how he should be putting down rates. Basically, Trump needs to blame Powell for everything that follows and what comes next, because these auctions need to happen and, to roll over the $10 trillion of debt. Congressman Thomas Massie, he continued out his message. Remember, he's got the Fed bill. I talked about that in the pre-election, that you've got a less than 1% chance that this may happen. But by voting Republican, you may get some more attention and Trump to the end of Federal Reserve. But Thomas Massie continued to push out there ahead of his 2028 campaign. Remember, you cannot fix any of the US problems with tax reform. Tax reform is tariffs. You can reset the world order towards BRICS. You can change the relationship. You can insulate America into this technocracy, but you cannot change anything of the debt-based Ponzi scheme. You cannot pay down the debt when the dollar is debt. You have to have monetary reform, which is why these stablecoin bills, bond bills, you need to watch those. Tariffs doesn't fix the problem. You can only fix America's problem by having a monetary reform, because it is every dollar is debt. It is wealth confiscation, and the inevitable, predictable, guaranteed outcome of a debt-based Ponzi scheme is a K-shaped economy where the rich get richer, the poor get poorer, until you get civil unrest. And once you enter into civil unrest, you can have a monetary reform. One way of going about it is universal basic income backed by stable coins, by manufacturing a civil unrest campaign, which is what's happening with open border policy and mass deportations, and moving towards the Palantir surveillance state, which is really put through in this one big, beautiful bill, wrapped up in a MAGA narrative that they're looking to protect the borders. Without monetary reform, the private issuers of the dollar, the banks, will always occupy America, and the banks are consolidated into public companies controlled by the asset managers, and the Federal Reserve System will always work for the banks. Until you deal with that structure, you'll always enter into this. And I covered that in 2011 in my book, Bank to the Future, Protect Your Future Before Governments Go Bust. You can get a free copy of that on simondixon.com alongside all the other things in my newsletter, completely free, by joining the Bitcoin Hard Talk membership portal for free. So the government will always work for corporate interest. Politics will always be theater, and the government will never work for Americans. And so therefore, the only way to control politics in America is to actually boycott and affect share price, because the corporations are what control. And when share prices impact, you do get change. And so that's where you should place your effort. While that's happening, everything else is theater. And that was never more prevalent than the Iran-Israel theater to reset the world order and usher in the need for the big, beautiful bill. Because for your safety and security, you're seeing all the false flag narratives that are needed right now to say Iran is out to get you. Iran is doing these safety cells and all of the false flag operations that said, after all of that, what was it that saved us? We only had a 12-day war because we had the problems that are solved in the big, beautiful bill. And so the surveillance state, Patriot Act 2.0, is what you need, ushered in by artificial intelligence. And because of the 12-day war, because the surveillance state, because the money printing to the military industrial complex, because of that, the stock market went up to new all-time highs, the QQQ went up, NASDAQ is at its best stage, and Trump gets to celebrate saying, now all we need to solve all of our problems is the big, beautiful bill. So once he gets his big, beautiful bill, which is the next battle, you'll sign up to the surveillance state that Palantir is ushering through. You'll sign up to increase in the debt ceiling to $5 trillion. You'll sign up to $1 trillion over to the military industrial complex. You'll sign up to more and more debt, more and more money printing, more and more inflation. And then what will come up after that? You'll have an argument with Jerome Powell. Jerome Powell will get to say, see, what comes next wasn't me. It was because of what Trump did next. And so Trump can then install his puppet shadow Fed chair. The puppet shadow Fed chair can then lower rates. He was talking, if you listen to Trump's craziness, he was saying that you need to lower rates by 250 basis points. So basically head to ZERPs, zero interest rate policy. Return to the old economy where the rich get richer, the poor get poorer. Return to K-shaped wealth transfer. Roll over the debt in the short term. Do exactly what Janet Yellen did. Janet Yellen basically took all of the US debt and said, we can't afford that long-term rate. We can't sell those 10-year bonds or 30-year bonds. We're going to have to sell 1-month bonds or 3 months bills. And we're going to have to do it at that lower rate. So we have to refinance the economy every week, every month, every 3 months. We pay that lower rate, and we refinance the whole thing on short-term debt, short-term debt, short-term debt. You can then back it by stablecoins, which Trump will be the issuer. You can then issue stablecoins with foreign direct investment deals, just like Trump did. He basically said, if Qatar wants to invest in Binance, send the $2 billion to my company, World Liberty Financial. I'll then issue $2 billion a stablecoin. I'll then invest that stablecoin into the Binance exchange, which is working at building capital markets and real world assets in the Middle East with the $260 million users. I'll then take that stablecoin and buy short-term debt. And now I've bought $2 billion in the auction, and we can refinance it, and I can use the yield in order to buy Bitcoin. And then we can get more and more stablecoin issuers, and we can essentially become a bond dealership for stablecoin issuers that want to control the future of the dollar. And we can do the whole thing on short-term debt so that we continually have to refinance so that we can justify why the Fed is trying to decrease rates. But it won't work because the Federal Reserve decrease rate policy has gone further and further away from the 10-year bond and the 30-year bond. So essentially, the stable coins will be the only option for the 3 month, 1 year, 1 week and 1 month debt. And we can essentially turn America into a distressed emerging market trade, and credit ratings can downgrade us further. Now, that means that as you get downgraded further, the long-term rates on the 10 and 30-year bonds go up. And what does that mean? It means that that has a negative impact on the real estate market. It has a negative impact on the auto loans because those loans are all based upon predictable debt. They have to pay higher rates on those 10-year and 30-year debt. And so the price of mortgages goes up. The price of auto loans goes up. The price on credit cards and rates go up. And you end up bailing out the economy by QE to infinity. So remember what I said with the tariff policy. You won't get QE. You won't get rate cuts. Everyone was predicting it at the time. No, this was to reset the world order. And then we move into stablecoin bills. Those impacts are having. And now we can transition back to the old policy. But we just need the time to reset the world order. So you delay the end. You have that 90-day tariff policy. You probably get extensions. You get no rate cuts. And in the meantime, the longer-term rates go up. At the moment, they corrected back a bit from their historical, rates of 4.5% and 5%. They corrected back down a bit. You support the internal BRICS trade, repatriation of capital, weakening of the dollar. We're now down to about 97.5%. So we went down below that 98% for DXY. And I think it goes down further. And lo and behold, what did we get an announcement of? We got an announcement that BRICS has now passed $1 trillion of internal trade. Now they're getting record high trade without the dollar. As the dollar weakens, capital repatriates. The stock market goes up to new all-time highs based upon the Magnificent Seven, the artificial intelligence and robotics plays, the energy plays, the steel manufacturing plays. Everything else is going down. And when you price the whole thing in Bitcoin, all markets are crashing relative to Bitcoin and relative to gold. So this is playing out exactly as predicted. And you can see how that plays into the geopolitical section. By following the money, not following the narratives, we get ahead of all the different trends as well. So that's going to do it for this week in macro. That's going to do it for part 2. Now, as I said, I would like you, if you enjoyed this macro section and you didn't watch part 1 on this week in Bitcoin, go back and see how the Bitcoin play and the macro play all play together to the geopolitical play as well. You'll find that Bitcoin is becoming more and more important in determining these macro trends. In fact, it is becoming a leading indicator over weekends, particularly for predicting the next phases as well, of both the macro and geopolitical section. But we are just 750 subscribers away from 100,000 subscribers on YouTube. Do me a favor, head over to YouTube right now. If you're not subscribed, hit subscribe, hit the bell symbol, hit all. Even if you're a subscriber, reset the algorithm because the shadow banning, and press that again, and I think you'll start getting notifications after the shadow ban. If we could, in this episode, get 750 people to subscribe on YouTube, I'll get a review. Once I hit that 100K mark, the algorithms will start ranking, and we can protect more and more people as we transition to this world of Bitcoin, AI, and CBDCs. But just in case, after that review, they don't like my content, make sure you follow me on X. I got 200,000 followers there now, and I do all my real-time spaces there. Follow me over there, and make sure you hit to get notifications every time, because they're shadow banning me there as well for telling the truth. They don't like the message. They don't want you to know about the proof of weapons network, but we need more people protected. I'm not boosted by the intelligence agency assets, because my message is real, and so therefore I rely upon you. In case that goes wrong, we're streaming from Rumble as well. I've only got a very small following over there, so do me a favor. If those 100,000 people go over to Rumble, that's where we're going to be if we get shut down. So follow me over there. And finally, join the Bitcoin Hard Talk free membership portal. Go to simondixon.com, put your email in there, and you'll be on my newsletter, and you'll get all the content and all the previous goodies that you need to know to prepare for this world of Bitcoin, AI, and central bank digital currencies. So without further ado, that's everything we got for the macro section of Bitcoin Hard Talk episode 87. We're now moving over to part 3, which is Bitcoin Hard Talk episode 87, this week in geopolitics. I'm going to take a little bit of water while you do that. Retweet, reshare, do what you need to do, help the algorithms, and then we're going to move into part 3. Welcome to Bitcoin Hard Talk episode 87. Does Israel control America? This week in geopolitics. I've already covered this week in macro and this week in Bitcoin in part 1 and part 2, which leads to the geopolitical section. Now, so many people ask this question. They believe that we were going to go into World War III, and I was telling them this is not World War III. The reason this is not World War III is because Israel does not control America. Israel is a colony of America. America is controlled by the deep state and the proof of weapons network. The proof of weapons network is broken into the military industrial complex, the financial industrial complex, the consumption part with Big Pharma, and also the tech part of it. Within those factions, they are controlled by the asset managers, and the asset managers do portfolio management of America, and therefore through lobby, they control the politics, they control the UK government, they control the US government, they control the Israeli government, they control the European Union government and all of its colonies around it. And they have welfare states like Israel, which are propped up by the military industrial complex. When you follow the money, you see, example, the illegal parts of what America needs to do through Silicon Valley, i.e. the Palantir types of operations, like beta testing, genocide as a service, and occupation as a service, are done in the Middle East. They integrate that with the drones, and they do, these wars of nutrition to the last Ukrainian in the Middle East by agitating sovereign states like Russia. They then vassalize all of the land and the wheat and the various resources and rare earth minerals for the benefit of the corporations on top of the proof of weapons network. They test out surveillance state technology in the UK and the European Union, Australia, Canada, various other parts of. And then they go up to the same network, and this is integrated into the technocracy. And the deals are financed by the financial industrial complex, managed by the asset managers, the investment banks. The banks own the Federal Reserve, they're the shareholders, and so they can then use this technology to control fiscal and monetary policy and engage in theater wars in order to control media to make people think that they are protecting democracy, or they are not engaged in a genocide, and just fool people into these false narratives. We're protecting the Jews, for example, when really they're just recruiting the Jews to join an army in order to engage in ethnic cleansing and genocide, while the safest place for Jewish people, for example, is the ones in Iran, the ones in America, the ones in Europe. The ones that are in Israel are being treated and recruited for an army, the least safe place for them to be, because they're being sacrificed for an ethnic cleansing and genocidal mission that redistributes trillions of dollars up to the profits of the military industrial complex. And they get to clip a little bit of money in order to prop up their colony. And then what do they get? They get a lovely, plausible deniability story. It wasn't us, it was Israel. And when they need to divorce from Israel, they can push out the narratives of AIPAC was blackmailing us, Epstein was blackmailing us, when all of those are used for the proof of weapons network controlled by the deep state that sits underneath the asset managers. And if you want to know who controls these networks, go to a Bilderberg meeting, go to a World Economic Forum, just go to Davos. They had one last month. You'll see Peter Thiel there. You'll see Larry Fink there. You'll see Elon Musk there. You'll see the real power structure of Western society. The city banks, the CEOs and the executives there that set the policies, set the agendas, and then BlackRock can control the capital flows with its other shareholdings like State Street and Vanguard in order to reset the world order and push out the narratives that are needed, and interfere in all the politics, install the politicians like Trump, who works for the financial industrial complex, Netanyahu, who works for the military industrial complex, and various others. And their job is to make an acceptable narrative while they steal money from the people and hand it over to the corporate contractors and pump the debt-based Ponzi scheme. So prior to during this week, everybody that had watched Bitcoin Hard Talk knew that there was a theater to reset the world into a multipolar world order. And I'm incredibly bullish on the future of the Middle East, because all the stocks over the last few months by all the insiders have been investing on these lower levels. And the military contracts have been investing in a contraction away from the Middle East, over from forever wars to more surveillance like Palantir and cybersecurity, which implies more defense rather than more attack. All the attack budgets were going over to Europe because there's another $1 trillion to be made from sacrificing Ukrainians and Russians for BlackRock, essentially, and the military profits at the expense of the European people and the UK and Brits. That money is being allocated, and the defense narrative of some of the vassalized states like Philippines, Japan, and Taiwan, they're able to put more and more military bases, the more and more they ratchet up the narrative that China, the boogie monster that controls communism, is trying to take away our freedom, reunify with Taiwan, wipe out all the silicon chips, and create trillions and trillions of dollars that would be their self-destruction as well. That makes no sense, as well as America's self-destruction. In fact, it would be a global self-destruction, because everything we rely upon relies upon those chips that require rare earth minerals. And that is what all of these battles are really about. It's a narrative to make you think you're fighting for freedom when they're using your money and creating inflation in order to steal your wealth. And the only way to protect yourself is to own assets. We covered that in the Bitcoin section and the macro section. So now let's go back to what everyone else that doesn't watch Bitcoin Hard Talk was saying. Everybody was saying to me while I was on X Spaces giving live coverage, this is World War III. Israel rules the world. And everybody was violently attacking me, saying, you're a Zionist shill because you're saying that Israel doesn't rule the world. And I was saying, no, it's a US colony for the profits of military industrial complex. And I said, what you are witnessing right now is a reset of the world order to a growth phase based upon peace in the Middle East and decolonization, because the large monetary players in the GCC and Saudi Arabia have bought a vision, because China normalized between Iran and Saudi Arabia, and BRICS backed the GCC to fight against dollarization and the International Monetary Fund. And now they've been paying down like Syria's World Bank debt, so that the GCC and its neighbors are able to control its region, while America strategically negotiates its exit by investing in data centers by NVIDIA across the Middle East, allows trades to happen, like the stablecoin trade that led to the sovereign wealth investment in Binance to have capital markets, because they're going to sit between BRICS and America as a regional technocracy, and the Middle East is going to be at the center of that. And in order to get that, you need to get Iran and Saudi Arabia to agree. China brokered that deal. That started with the assassination by Trump in his previous administration, when he assassinated Qasem Soleimani. That led to negotiated outcome, and it required a free Palestine and a Palestinian state, so that you don't have uprisings all around. That set the game into the October the 7th. Netanyahu didn't ethnically cleanse the Palestinians. Because he didn't achieve that goal, Hamas resisted. When Hamas resisted, it means that you can't colonize the land and do the Greater Israel Project, which was a US military industrial complex profit strategy. And so now you need to move to the financial industrial complex, investing in the region, vassalizing certain regions, which means you need to negotiate with MBS from the GCC and the other brokers in the region, which means you need peace. You need actually Palestine to be its own state, and you need Israel to become either a one-state solution, or at least a two-state that is not funded by the military industrial complex to disrupt the region, which was the purpose of the colony when it was created in the first place. And so in order to make that transition, you needed a big theater to make people think that we're about to enter into World War III. The narrative started ratcheting up, and the narrative was Iran has a nuclear bomb and it's about to blow up Israel. And so because Iran, as I've been observing, is funding and supporting the axis of resistance less, and we started to see groups like ISIS, which are US assets and Israeli assets in the colony, normalize into HTS and become, puppet governments in Syria, based upon a placeholder, while the GCC executes this change and decolonization of US. And we started to see more and more land being controlled by Israel, which I believe is being vassalized into the GCC, and without the support of the military industrial complex and all the negotiations that BlackRock and the financial industrial complex are doing. So I said, in order to get to that transition, we need some theater. And we needed theater, if you watched it last week and the week before, that leads to everybody saying that they achieved what they wanted to achieve. So it would be a three-way victory. And I gave commentary on X Spaces every single day. Everything was recorded if anyone wants to go back and see it in real time. And I got absolutely abused, as I said. People calling me a Zionist shill, people calling me all sorts of anti-Semite or a self-hating Jew, and all the things that you get called, when all I'm doing is saying, this is not what I want to happen. This is just what I believe is happening based upon following the money. And through the whole process, when I take off my financial hat and geopolitical hat and macro hat and Bitcoin hat, I've been pushing the humanitarian side of this. I've been pushing that, this is an absolute atrocious humanitarian crisis that is crimes against humanity, that is being documented in 4D, that is the most atrocious thing that I have ever had to witness in real time. but this has always been happening. This is just the one that we got to watch. And I've been debunking, the West pretending that this had something to do with, beheaded babies or mass sexual assault. And if you go back to my blog where I put the Atrocity Inc. blog, you'll find out the truth about what really happened on October the 7th and how the Proof of Weapons Network led you to believe that it was something different. Anyway, I'm going to be doing something different as well in this episode. We've been playing around with AI, and in a bit, I'm going to let you know, I put, whenever I see a really good documentary that I think you should watch, I put it up on my blog and I give my own commentary on it. And we've been playing around with artificial intelligence, and I think you'll like what you'll see. Rather than having to watch the whole documentary, and anyone that wants the detail, you can watch it. We've been getting AI to kind of have a conversation summarizing the documentary, and I'm going to play it during this episode in a bit, because the narrative of weapons of mass destruction we've heard before. And if you're not a Bitcoin Hard Talk listener, you would have fell for it probably, thinking we're entering into World War III. Same narrative was being used. Who's got the weapons of mass destruction? Israel has them. And JFK had to be assassinated to get it. And most people, when they understand the real story, know that it was Israel. And I'll go through the documentary that goes through exact details with declassified documents and everything that was confirmed when we had the JFK drop, for those that understand how to read between the lines. And the documentaries you can watch, but we'll play a little AI summary and try something new. Let me know in the comments section what you think of these little AI summaries. If you like them, we'll do more of them, so you don't have to watch the long documentary, and we can try and get the points out in a few minutes as well. But even though I was abused, I believe that I am right. And people still to this day are saying, you are wrong, you are wrong. We shall see. This will go exactly how I think it went. Now, some of the details I'll get wrong because I'm not privy to these meetings. But by following the money, I think I know the outcome of where this is going. And I covered it in detail in last week's episode. Remember, we break up all of these episodes into 3. So you can just watch part 3. And you can watch part 3 from the last 2 weeks if you've missed it. But anyway, what happened this week? Well, after the theater, Peter Hegseth claimed that it was a massive, massive victory for America. It was the best operation that happened, and they prevented nuclear war from happening. Khomeini came out, Ayatollah Khomeini, and claimed complete victory. Netanyahu came out, and he basically said that our military our nuclear program is fine. We moved them. We gave everyone advance warning, confirmed everything that we knew if you were watching it in real time and not following the media by following all the satellite on the spaces. We were following all the satellites in real time and all the rubbish that US put out there when the CIN debunked it. And then they say fake news. It's the Democrats that are coming after us. If you still believe in that Republican and Democrats game, man, you are being brainwashed into complete slush. I feel sorry for anyone. I mean, if it makes you feel better that this is a MAGA strategy and the Democrats are coming after the Republicans and the Democrats are corrupt and the Republicans are the good people that are making America great again and Trump works for us and he's coming after the deep state. If you still believe all that mush, please get some financial literacy, continue to watch our show, and you will understand how the world really works. I mean, geopolitics can be analyzed through financial flows. Power to financial flows is how you get the truth, and it's always the opposite of the bullshit that you're being sold. Netanyahu came out and said, complete victory. We managed to protect ourselves from a nuclear threat of the most dangerous terrorists in the world. So for those who didn't follow the 12-day war, let me explain to you what happened in simple words before we cover the little AI recap of who actually has the nukes and how they were achieved. So let me explain it in simple words what actually happened. Part 1 of the theater. Israel bombed Iran. Essentially, this was scripted. This was agreed. And I know many people don't want to believe that, but, this is not people sat around a table. the way geopolitics works is they engage in diplomacy through proxies, like Qatar might be negotiating. They happen over long term, and these large theaters, every part of it has to be agreed. Which strikes can happen. This is not a real war like Ukraine and Russia. This is an agreed negotiation and a transition. They're scripted, they're pre-agreed, and they're not based upon treachery or traitors. It's based upon real realities of covert operations, attempted regime changes, financial weapons of mass destruction to try and overthrow countries. These are not things people voluntarily go into. It's pragmatic, based upon the real power dynamics of the region and a country working in its best interest based upon the power dynamics if it is still a sovereign country. Or if it is controlled by BlackRock, like the West, then what is in the corporate interest? And so people get very offended if you're a patriot of a particular country. But this is pre-agreed. So the assassinations that were agreed to happen, from my perspective, was the IRGC hardliners, and Khamenei was not meant to go in that. So we immediately had massive assassinations of IRGC hardliners that would never agree to the regional vision that needs to happen. Then what you happened in script 2, part 2, scene 2, is Iran bombed Israel. And the idea of this was strategically weakened. So you had the hardliners weakened in Iran. And by the way, when there's things like civilian casualties, this is people acting out a script. Nobody's going to agree to have their people civilians, but someone like Israel will, for revenge, because these people aren't friends, they're enemies, but they'll go off script sometimes and kill civilians. And then that can actually derail the agreement. But then there's additional diplomacy that needs to happen if you go and default from the agreed. It's game theory all the way. But Iran was meant to come back and weaken Israel's tech, ports, their command infrastructure, their real estate. The idea was that you vassalize the economy for strategic takeover by acquisition of those assets, as agreed by BlackRock, which would be the financial industrial complex taking over from the military industrial complex. Instead of the military making profits by destroying the region in forever wars, they agreed deals, i.e. Trump negotiating those deals between the relevant powers that were buying their freedom. So Trump comes out and say trillions and trillions of dollars of deals are being done. They're buying decolonization and the removal of soft power as agreed, while BlackRock invests in the new regional power, while they remain hosted in America. So we had essentially that was the vassalization. And I'll go through what was actually vassalized. So on Israel TV, there was a media blackout. People were arrested if they covered what was actually happening to their real estate. They couldn't let you know because in Israel media is meant to say we're destroying the bomb, the nuclear bomb. In the US side, you had everyone saying, oh, our point is, you had Tulsi Gabbard come out and say, but we don't believe there is a nuclear weapons program. There's a nuclear energy program, but our position is that they're years away. And then Trump said, no, that's not our position. Well, we don't care anyway. And then new intelligence comes out saying, yeah, there is a nuclear weapon and a nuclear bomb. And so based upon that, the Fox News and the CNN and the agents that work for the deep state, they were meant to push and ratchet up the narrative that the US is about to bomb Iran. Now, they're meant to hold on to the narrative that Israel controls America. So those different factions of people that know or have bought into that theory that it's not a colony and that Israel blackmails America through Epstein. And they do, by the way, but it's all done at the deep state level in the US for corporate interest. But they think that Netanyahu ultimately rules the world and Jewish power rules everything. There are powerful Jewish people at the corporate level, but there's much powerful non-Jewish power as well. And, power changes dynamically, but those conspiracy theories are used in order to bring out a different narrative, in order to blame essentially everything on this Israel structure while they get divorced. But it's all part of the same power structure. So anyway, the US came out and bombed Iran. So we're in now Act 3. And people are either meant to believe that Trump's making America great again, and that we're coming after the terrorists, and that the nuclear threat has been taken away. And the other people were meant to believe, see, Israel rules the world. We're about to go into World War III because Israel is forcing America, and obviously that is actually happening. But as long as they don't understand the real power structure of the proof of weapons network, they stop there at the Israel level rather than saying who controls Israel. Because Israel doesn't keep all the money, it goes back to the corporations. America can't tell its people, by the way, we have a debt-based Ponzi scheme called the dollar, and it's backed up by a proof of weapons network. And we have colonies around the world that create violence so that we can print money and steal money from you. That helps the share price of American corporations, and we have a different covert network in order to hide the fact that our dollar is backed up by genocide, murder, and funding terrorist groups like ISIS, Al-Qaeda, and M23. That's not a narrative you can sell to the Americans. And so you have to create these alternative narratives and have colonies for plausible deniability. So anyway, we had Act 3. So in Act 3, America bombed 3 nuclear sites, including one of them was called, Fordo, which had been evacuated some time ago. And all the enriched uranium had been stockpiled and was moved away from these locations. And the satellite imagery was able to confirm that. And if you go to anybody that knows the region, they know that all of the 9,000 kilograms of Iranian enriched uranium is completely intact and secure. But we had this theater which was presented to the American people that somehow there was an implosion from within that didn't even impact the outside, and that these bombs magically don't create any nuclear, environmental disaster while you completely destroy all of the, the nuclear programs. So we're led to believe no environmental cost, and it can implode from within, even though the outside of the things are, the things they have to make you believe. And people buy it up. They actually believe that this actually happened. There was absolutely no risk of radiation leak whatsoever. We're not hearing anything. If anyone was familiar with a real nuclear, bomb, Hiroshima and Nagasaki, the Japanese are still impacted. The Vietnamese are still impacted from those chemical warfares. It's only America and the Proof of Weapons Network that has ever done any of these things. Remember, if you watch part 1, we had this crash in the Bitcoin mining hash power. You can watch part 1 to understand what happened. Immediately after it, all of the Iranian Bitcoin mining hash power came back online afterwards. So then we moved over to Scene 4, Act 4. And in Scene 4, essentially, Iran is going to escalate to World War III. They're coming after U.S. targets. They're coming after U.S. Military sites, and U.S. has surrounded Iran. That's why this escalation towards potentially building a nuclear weapon was a threat in the first place, because that was the only way they could negotiate their freedom to have a nuclear enrichment program. It's the reason why they funded the Axis in the first place, to counterfight the Israeli Greater Israel project. And it's why Americans created groups like Al-Qaeda and ISIS in order to fight against resistance so that they could colonize more land through the Greater Israel project, which does profits back into the military industrial complex and pushes GDP up and stock market prices up away from the American people and over to those that profit from those stock prices. And so in part 4, we had Iran firing rockets over at the Qatar by for the US military base. So what happened there? A warning was given in advance. Trump even thanked for the warning. No damage to Qatar happened. And we had all the diplomatic announcements you would expect. All of the regional powers like MBS in Saudi Arabia, they condoned the Israel attacks on Iran. They said Iran has the right to defend itself. They then said that they condoned the attacks from Iran onto Qatar. Qatar said that they will see what they're going to do about it. Iran said this has got nothing to do with Qatar. This is retaliation for the US bases. They warned in advance and they intercepted exactly as agreed, exactly as scripted, exactly as was meant to happen. But all the Americans are bricking themselves thinking Israel controls us. Epstein has blackmailed our politicians. We're going to World War III, when none of that was happening. The markets were telling us oil prices, in fact, went down from all the insider trading from the BlackRock hedge funds and the Trump administration insiders that were literally crashing the price of oil, while oil was meant to spike if this was going to be a war between Iran and the US. Anyway, so then the US thanked Iran and said, it's all over. It's all over. Iran apologized to Qatar. And then suddenly Qatar says that they're negotiating a peace deal with Iran and they're brokering a deal. Israel thanked Qatar as well for protecting. The US said, by the way, we're in peace. In the next 6 hours, there'll be this thing, and 12 hours will something will happen, and in 24 hours, something will happen. And suddenly they announced the whole thing on Truth Social. And so suddenly we entered into scene 5. Scene 5 was, hey, guess what? We're at peace. The US says we destroyed the nuclear program. We had a very successful mission. Israel says we protected ourselves from the nuclear threat and killing all the Jews by the crazy terrorists. And Iran said we fought back against the Americans, against the Israelis. And guess what? Our nuclear program is intact and we're still sovereign and we're going to continue things our way and we're going to rebuild. A few hours after, Trump basically announced that Israel is much safer. And now, thanks to his bombing, these 3 nuclear sites and 25, were protected, and then started going nuts at Israel, as if the Israeli relationship and the US relationship was starting to be strategically weakened, and that they were in good talks with Iran. And so you had Trump coming back and forth saying all these different things. We had 25 Iranian missiles that were basically penetrated in Israel after. And then Trump said immediately, Israel, take back the bombs. And so Trump gets to say, you see, I'm not controlled by Israel. I'm actually in charge. And so Trump started to get more and more angry with Iran and Israel. And he does his, what's the TV show he used to do? You're Fired. I've forgotten the name. Anyway, put in the comment section and remind me what the name of the show was. In UK, we had a version called what's his name? The Amstrad founder. Oh, I'm losing all my mind right now, getting too old. You know what we're going to have to do in the future? I'm going to ask, like, in real time AI, and then we can fact check these things and see how different it is as well, based upon that. But anyway, if Iran's nuclear facilities were fully destroyed, then what's the point of urging them to, come back to the negotiation table? Why would there even be a negotiation? Because they weren't destroyed at all. Now, of course, there was some effect, and you'll see the little show effects. But if you've been watching the Gaza genocide, you'll see all of the videos that Israel put out, the whole thing, the theatrics, the fakes, just because they wanted to ethnically cleanse, genocide, take down all the infrastructure, blow up all the hospitals, blow up all the universities, claim it was all human shield, say that they are coming after Hamas and pretending that they want the hostages back when they know exactly where the hostage is back. They can have it at any time. That's why Israel is protesting against their government, engineering the civil unrest that eventually leads to the cabinet overthrow, Netanyahu's negotiated exit, and then we start to move to the end of theater. The whole thing was theater. The US bombed 2 empty facilities that had been previously struck by Israel anyway. And then he bombed let's see, make sure I get this. He bounced 6 bombs off an infrastructure facility. This was the the Ferdos facility. And that genuinely did hit, but there was a very theatrical video showing it happening from inside and minor damage to the outside. And basically, they got to use that in order to claim the complete destruction, despite the opposite being the case. And that's it. That was the 5 scene. Now, I'm not sure whether there's an Act 6 and there is more to come. And maybe there is more to come, but that was completely in line with, if you remember, go to the last 2 weeks of Bitcoin Hard Talk. I didn't know how it was going to happen. I didn't think the US would actually strike, but I was saying this is a theatrics in order to lead to all 3 parties claiming victory. These were contained strikes. It was basically a nothing burger. And what else did I say would happen? Remember what I said? What does Trump get for negotiating this deal for the financial industrial complex now that the military industrial complex is going to be exiting? I said he wants to take credit and be nominated for the Nobel Peace Prize. What comes out immediately afterwards? Pakistan, after those operations, nominates Trump for the Nobel Peace Prize. And he gets to say, I saved the world from nuclear war, and I'm going to get the Nobel Peace Prize, despite the fact that this was China years ago, normalizing between Iran and Saudi Arabia, and all the negotiated outcome had already been determined. And that's why the financial industrial complex and BlackRock and the Proof of Weapons Network allowed for Trump to be installed so that he could implement the tariff policies that reset the world order, that gave BRICS the power to partner with the GCC, that gave them the leverage to initiate a decolonization process from the US so that the military industrial complex would stop making profit from forever war, and the financial industrial complex could reinvest in the region by partnering with GCC and Saudi Arabia that required Iran to agree to so that the US would take away the sanctions based upon a Palestinian solution, which required the vassalization and the strategic weakening of Israel into a real state or a one-state solution. I'm not sure exactly which one's going to happen, but Iran officially suddenly afterwards withdraws from the IAEA. What's the IAEA? It is a construct of the post-World War II Bretton Woods system where you have nuclear inspections. Iran withdraws, and that is soft power for America in the region taken away based upon this story, because it was leaked that Israel, IAEA was giving Israel leaked documents around the nuclear program. And those previously said there isn't a nuclear threat, it is enriching nuclear energy. So it was all the weapons of mass destruction narrative. And it was all, remember, Operation Gladio that we covered in previous episodes. Strategic tension between Israel and Iran created trillions of dollars of profits for the military industrial complex. Israel is essentially right now preparing for vassalization under the banner of Build Back Better. Do you remember that one? We had Build Back Better in the UK by Boris Johnson and Build Back Better by Biden in the US. Well, now Israel has got a Build Back Better program. And what is the Build Back Better program? Well, after the Iranian attacks, which apparently did nothing, according to them and their media, Israel is advancing a plan that could basically force citizens to sell their homes to the state if they reject an urban renewable plan. So this is the takeover of the land to the state, ready for vassalization and strategic takeover to the GCC. Once you create civil unrest within Israel, overthrow the cabinet, Netanyahu negotiates his exit, the GCC installs their puppet regime, and you end up building some type of one-state solution after probably a two-state solution fails, an Arab majority, the military-industrial complex exit, and lo and behold, you get the rebuild plan based upon the negotiations, removal of sanctions from Iran, and probably the fastest growing region in the world over the years ahead, because they sit between BRICS and Western powers, just because they managed to negotiate a decolonization and this theater. So what essentially was happening is Iran actually inflicted a lot of damage. And I'm going to go through the type of damage in the final part, just so you know, because the media won't tell you what really happened. Basically, the missile damage is being used as a cover for a land grab. This is decolonization. This is reverse settler colonialism. Iran managed to go after some of the illegal settlements. They hit strategic targets. We'll go through some of those right now. And Finance Minister Smotrich, which is a hardline extreme terrorist Zionist that funds and gives the terrorists in the West Bank guns so that they can steal homes, burn down Palestinians' houses, terrorize the people with state sponsorship to steal their homes, take over the land, and build the illegal settlements, which has been classified as terrorist activity around the world. But it is funded by people like Mariam Edelstein, who invests in these illegal settlements and gave 100 million to the Trump administration through her contributions as well. Anyway, so you had Smotrich basically saying that we're going to have this inter-minister task force to lead the urban renewal in the area, as in the missile hit areas, basically admitting there was mass damage. And suddenly they're doing what the South Africa plan, when apartheid South Africa had urban, what are they called? Urban renewal plans. And that's why you've got this whole white genocide narrative. There's lots of crime. Don't get me wrong. There's really bad things happening in South Africa. But Trump, remember, go back to previous episodes of Bitcoin Hard Talk. We did the South African, humiliation ritual because they were trying to remove the genocide case that has been trialed in the highest court in the world. That would mean that the military industrial complex, companies like Lockheed Martin in the US, would be implicated in the genocide and they would have to pay reparations. So Trump comes after for the military industrial complex as part of the negotiated exit, that you take away all of those connections, because the military will give up some of its profits in the Middle East to the finance, but you need to make that problem go away because that will hit our profits. It's all connected together. And so now Smotrich is saying that we're going to get more land. He thinks he's going to get more land. He'll be overthrown. So as of today, according to this, 9,900 claims have been fired at missile-related damage, and they've been filed to the Israeli government. That's essentially nearly 10,000 Israeli families that are potentially facing state-led redevelopment, and offers for what they need to do. They may not be able, and basically it's an offer that they may not be able to refuse because they're getting everything ready for a Netanyahu exit, vassalization of the region, overthrow of the cabinet, and then eventually a Gaza ceasefire, because there is nothing they can do to get the resistance to stop unless Iran has agreed to it, Hamas has agreed to it, and the negotiations are happening. There is no way of forcing this without having all parties agreed. So unless we're going to World War III, as they would lead you to believe, we're doing a deal. And that deal has already happened. And this is the theater to get to the other side of the deal. So the Iran deal is to remove the sanctions. The GCC had to spend trillions in order to decolonize, but they get effective control of all the Israeli occupied land, the parts in Syria, the parts essentially in Palestine, which will be working with its neighbors to implement the Egypt plan to invest 53 billion in the rebuild. And at some point, once this deal has been fully announced, the Gaza genocide will end. And why is the genocide still happening? Because Netanyahu is going for strategic leverage to get a better exit, and he's negotiating with people's lives That means that more foreign direct investment is going to happen because Netanyahu is a piece for the military industrial complex. The military industrial complex has shares in the financial industrial complex. The more violence and genocide that can be inflicted, the more profit for the corporations that control America, because that is how the dollar is backed. The dollar is backed by a proof of weapons network that has always been doing genocide and violence in order to prop up the scheme, while claiming that it is saving, trying to civilize the world by exporting democracy. And the books will be written in the future, and people will learn what happened, just like it was with the British Empire. But we're told that the US strikes have set back Iran's nuclear program by essentially, the reality is, the New York Times said a few months. Iran's foreign minister said that the nuclear program will continue. Israeli Prime Minister Netanyahu said Iran's nuclear program is completely destroyed. An early US intelligence report came out and suggested that the US strikes only set back Iran's nuclear program by a few months. Iran's 60% enriched uranium stockpile was fully evacuated before the US strikes, and most of Israel's damages were done not by strikes by controlling the air, but infiltrations on the ground in Iran by Mossad infiltration, rather than actually airstrikes. So they don't control the air while they said they do. It was done from infiltrations. They were blowing up car bombs. They're the suicide bombers. They're the terrorists. Every accusation is a confession. The tactics that they used with ISIS and Al-Qaeda were Israeli operations, and Israel is a colony of America, and America works for corporate interests, and the deep state work for pushing up profits by the military industrial complex, financial industrial complex, and tech companies. So no, Israel does not control America. Israel is plausible deniability for the crimes against humanity that back up the dollar by the US colony. And that's exactly as it said. Khamenei came out, I think I confirmed that Iran's nuclear program has not been destroyed. And the damages that the US proof of weapons network signed off on to vassalize Israel for decolonization were all essentially there. Now, what I'm going to do right now is I'm going to do two more sections. We're going to go through exactly who had the financial weapons of the weapons of mass destruction, the WMDs. And then I'm going to go through the damage that actually was done as the agreed vassalization. And then I'm going to go through what came next. And then we're going to wrap this up. And so that will be everything. So basically, the military bases that were taken out in Israel, if anyone wants to do their fact checking and do some real journalism rather than what you actually... and I'll probably get these name wrongs, but Iran took out the Al Jalal base, which is basically the Northern Command in Israel, the Tel Nof and Navatim, which is where the F-35s were grounded, the fighter jets, the Unit 8200 HQ, which is where all the cyber ops happen. That's where Silicon Valley invests in the US, the Israeli tech companies to do some of the US ops through Silicon Valley. And then they get bought back by Google and various other companies. They took out the Mossad HQ, which is a symbolic humiliation exercise, basically. The result is that they get to demonstrate that air supremacy is uncredited and that cyber defenses are essentially collapsed within Israel. Those in the know will know. And what happened to the share price of Lockheed Martin that has those F-35 fighter jets? It corrected and it crashed approximately about 10%, and then went through as well. So that's that was agreed. We also had in Israel energy humiliation. Basically, the Haifa refinery, which is fuel supply, they were essentially torched. The dual power plant strikes, that was the National Grid failed, and that created a blackout so that nobody could report any of this stuff. We were covering the whole thing live on X Spaces as it was all happening using the satellite imagery. What's the result? Economic paralyzation via basically rolling blackouts, which then obviously creates the environment where people want to leave. They were spending their time in bunkers. They weren't attacking civilians like they do in Gaza, but they were taking out strategic targets so that the Israelis want to leave. Population growth means reverse population growth means economic impact. They also came after the agreed targets of the tech and research devastation. So the Khiyat GAT, which is Intel's $10 billion fabs were frozen, 64% of exports dead around that. There was also the Weizmann Institute, which is basically a 500 million biomedical IP area that was essentially targeted. What's the result? The innovation economy was exposed as essentially vulnerable. And so that strategically weakened so that you can buy up those tech assets by the GCC and have vassalization. What about logistics infrastructure? There was no economy runs without supply chains. And so the Haifa port was closed after it was targeted. This is critical imports and exports that were all halted. This meant Egypt and Jordan couldn't get their natural gas, which is essential for some of the revenue that props up the Israeli economy. And so while the stock market remained unaffected, you had the strategic weakening of the private assets as well. There was also strikes on Ben Gurion Airport. This basically was shut down twice. Insurers fled. They won't insure anything. Insurance premiums became non-existent. The result here was that during this time, global trade routes were, basically rerouted. That pushes up the price. That created disruption, and basically confidence shattered in many of the things. What else did we see? We saw a talent exodus. So at various times you couldn't leave, or you could, but essentially it was, from what we know that happened at the time, 80,000 citizens fled. This is the biggest outflow since 1948. It's the Israeli Nakba, as it were. 80,000 fled. Are they going to be coming back? We'll see. The Netanyahu was essentially banned from dual citizen nations from leaving. This is a desperate move to stop the brain drain. So Netanyahu said the dual citizens can't leave. It's almost like one would say human shields if there weren't bunkers as well. Every accusation is a confession. But the result is that the brain drain accelerated the economic vassalization. On the financial carnage that was also targeted, there was approximately $5 billion wasted in 1 week. That's 725 military peak burn rate. 725 military per day peak burn rate. That's not something that the Israeli economy can sustain without subsidization. 593 million per day on failed offensive strikes. And this is the, basically de-weaponization. And Iran was basically still standing at the end of it. The Iron Dome, which is 200 million per day, 400 plus missiles were struck that needed to be intercepted. Those interceptors cost a lot, and there was a weakening of the reserves. So the result is essentially $1.47 billion of civilian assets were vaporized. And Israel just filed basically a missile right at the end of it. And let me do a little bit of fun stuff. I want to calculate this. I always tell you to calculate things in Bitcoin. I did some of the, I saw a good post and I thought I'd borrow some of it. And I did a bit of my own work as well. To basically show you how much Bitcoin opportunity cost this is. So that in the future, if Bitcoin goes up as it historically has gone up, you can see that each of these rockets, if it had just been invested in peaceful proof of work rather than the fiat proof of weapons network, what it would actually be worth. So essentially, missiles worth 28.3 Bitcoin were sent by Israel to stop Iranian missiles that were worth 18.9 Bitcoin. And that was every single night for 12 nights straight. So the Israel-Iran war ended up where essentially there was no victory for Israel, there was no victory for Iran, there was no victory for America, but we were essentially empty vaults. So this is the strategic weakening, as agreed, of the two economies with a narrative that they get to go home and say that everybody won. The total cost of the war in BTC over the 12 days was essentially, the numbers are staggering. So let's have a look. So at 2 a.m. in Tel Aviv, we had the sirens waving when we had scene one. Israel launched the basically Arrow interceptors, and that was 28.3 Bitcoin valued at $3 million. And that was gone in 8 seconds. They then fired 50 to 100 of these. That's 2,830 Bitcoin worth of defense against missiles that cost them 18.9 Bitcoin each. So Iran's strategy from there was to overwhelm with volume. So 400 plus ballistic missiles were launched. That's 1,000 plus 1,000 plus drones. The cost to Iran was 7,554 Bitcoin worth of missiles alone, let alone anything else that we don't know. So the cost to Israel was 2,124 Bitcoin just in the Arrow interceptors for those. So the math of essentially modern day war is that both sides lose, which was what I said was the goal and the negotiated outcome. Then the US entered the throne. So when the US entered, we had Operation Midnight, what do they call it? Operation Midnight Hammer. They sent 7 stealth bombers, which was each carrying bunker busters worth 30.2 Bitcoin, which is $3.2 million. The operation happened in one night, and there was one operation which cost 9,442 Bitcoin worth of American firepower. That's essentially 1/5 of all the Bitcoin strategic reserves. And once they've given back the strategic reserves to Bitfinex, that's 10% of all the Bitcoin strategic reserves. What was the target? It was to the underground bunkers. The result? Essentially, financial exhaustion was the end result as well. Ready for the big, beautiful bills. So the final tally after all 12 days was 240,837 Bitcoin value was destroyed, which is $25.5 billion. That's more than 1% of all Bitcoin that will ever exist, vaporized through the proof of weapons network that, if invested in peaceful proof of work, would probably be worth, as Bitcoin goes from the 6th largest asset to potentially the largest asset and takes over gold, more than the entire national debt of America, because peaceful proof of work makes way more financial sense than violent proof of weapons. And that was all done in just less than 2 weeks. So what will they do? They'll print more dollars and replace it, which will create more inflation for Americans, and that money will go back to corporate interests, and it will create more civil unrest that will usher in Palantir's surveillance state and one big beautiful bill, and give the justification for why you absolutely must sign up for more surveillance. Just like Patriot Act, just like 9/11, which was an operation in order to justify war by the proof of weapons network. So Iran achieved basically significant impact with minimal expenditure, in terms of the relative to what it cost America and Israel for its colony. And they ended up basically inflating an estimated $17.6 billion in damages, which is 3.3% of Israeli GDP. And the conflict has left Israel basically conforming a strained financial system, disruptions in insurance markets, challenges to the international standing, and essentially BRICS countries at the same time called for a nuclear-free Middle East. Remember what I said? BRICS was back in the GCC. The GCC needed to negotiate decolonization from the military-industrial complex. Instead, the financial-industrial complex will come along, invest in the region alongside GCC, vassalize Israel, a potential one-state solution if a two-state solution fails, and then you'll have fast growth in the Middle East who will sit in the middle between BRICS and Western. The Western allies will be vassalized into BlackRock, and then they will invest into the multipolar world. And the only state in the Middle East that is known to possess nuclear weapons is Israel. And this was done to prevent weapons of mass destruction that didn't exist. And so there's only one country in the Middle East when you move to this denuclearization program that is being agreed and will be the negotiation. There's only one that sits outside the treaty on oversight, and that's Israel. The reality is that this stands in direct contrast to the the non-proliferation efforts and the non-proliferation agreements, the ones that everyone needs to sign up to. Why does Israel get to do that? Because Israel does not control America. Israel is a colony of America, and America has a deep state, and the deep state has a military-industrial complex and an asset management that controls the political process. But change is coming. And so what I want you to do, if you enjoyed this content, is I'd like you to check out my blog. What I did is I created a summary of a documentary by Ryan Dawson. And I'm going to play a little AI summary. It's going to take about 8 minutes. I hope you like this content. And then we're going to wrap up with the final impact of what actually happened and what will come next. And that will be the final part. But essentially, the blog is called, if you go to simondixon.com, How Israel Stole the Bomb and Murdered the President, Uncovering the NUMEC Conspiracy. And so what I want to do is give a little summary right now. So Azad's going to play a little bit of a video that we created so that even if you don't watch the whole thing, at least you get an 8-minute overview. But I'd love you to go and watch that documentary because it will help you fill in the gaps between some of these covert operations, how the proof of weapons network works, the deep state, and how Israel got the nuke in the first place, which pushed the narratives of weapons of mass destruction that led to the justification for this bombing that made shit tons of money for the military-industrial complex as the GCC negotiates its exit. And so, Azad, do you want to play that video and let me know what you think in the comments of this format, and we'll do more like this to summarize more of our blogs.
All right, let's really dig into something fascinating and frankly pretty wild today. We're talking about some truly intense and, well, controversial claims around a really pivotal moment in American history. Our deep dive is into the documentary NUMEC, How Israel Stole the Atomic Bomb and Killed JFK by Ryan Dawson, and also a blog post by Simon Dixon that summarizes it. So our mission today, just to distill the core narrative, the surprising details presented in these sources. We want you to get the full picture as they present it. We're definitely not taking sides or endorsing any viewpoint here, just conveying the ideas found in the material itself.
Yeah, and what's really insightful when you look at these particular sources is how they try to weave together things that seem, on the surface, pretty unrelated. You've got post-World War II, arms smuggling, a presidential assassination, all presented through this one lens of a single covert operation. It's less about fact-checking for us today and more about understanding the anatomy of such a claim, how it's built.
That's a great way to put it. So the documentary argues this wasn't some official government deal, state to state, to arm Israel with nuclear weapons. It claims it was a covert operation.
Yeah.
What kind of network does it allege was behind this?
Well, the narrative points to a pretty powerful mix. Zionist organizations, wealthy financiers, and even figures from organized crime. They talk about this group called the Sunborn Group, which allegedly brought together Jewish agency leaders, some influential American Zionists, and mafia figures like Meyer Lansky.
Lansky. And the claim is their charities weren't really charities.
Exactly. The sources allege these were fronts for laundering money and illegally trafficking weapons, often using docks controlled by the mafia, supposedly.
Okay, that's a lot right there. A covert network, high-level names, organized crime.
Yeah.
So if this alleged network was handling the funding and smuggling, where do the sources say the actual nuclear material came from? They name a specific place, right?
They do, yeah. The Nuclear Materials and Equipment Corporation, NUMEC. It was a key facility handling nuclear materials located in Apollo, Pennsylvania. Its founder, Dr. Zalman Shapiro, is described in these sources as a committed Zionist.
And NUMEC is where the core theft claim comes in.
Right. The sources assert that, well, an unprecedented amount of weapons-grade uranium vanished from NUMEC. We're talking hundreds of kilograms, specifically of 97.7% enriched uranium. Now, that's an extremely high enrichment level, definitely weapons grade, and the sources stress it was unique to the U.S. naval program at the time.
Which makes his disappearance even more significant, according to them.
Precisely. And the narrative gets pretty vivid.
Yeah, I saw that. Alleged eyewitness accounts.
Of Shapiro himself, supposedly nervous, overseeing late-night loading, sealed containers of this highly enriched uranium, HEU, onto trucks. And the destination, according to these accounts, Israel via Zim shipping lines.
And they connect this to official investigations, too.
They do. They mention CIA and FBI probes. Specifically, they claim the CIA collected environmental samples outside Israel's Dimona nuclear site and allegedly found traces of the exact same 97.7% enriched uranium that was processed back at NUMEC.
Okay, so that's the alleged mechanism. Where does President Kennedy fit into this picture, according to these sources?
This is where the narrative really pivots. They detail JFK's alleged firm stance against Israel's nuclear ambitions. He apparently demanded international inspections of Dimona repeatedly, and Prime Minister David Ben-Gurion, the sources claim, constantly obstructed this with lies and deception.
There's even that quote they attribute to JFK expressing frustration, something like that.
The sons of bitches lie to me constantly about their nuclear capacity. That's the quote presented. And this pressure, the sources argue, was immense. They claim it's why Ben-Gurion resigned in 1963.
And it wasn't just the president. His brother was involved, too.
Right, Attorney General Robert Kennedy. He was running a parallel effort, according to the documentary, trying to force the American Zionist Council, which later became AIPAC, to register as a foreign agent under FRI, the Foreign Agents Registration Act.
Which would mean publicly disclosing their activities and funding for foreign interests.
Correct. And the sources say RFK gave them a tight deadline, a 72-hour ultimatum, apparently, in October 1963.
And then November 1963.
Exactly. 1 month later, JFK is assassinated. And the sources claim this just completely changed the landscape. They describe Lyndon B. Johnson, who took over, as a compromised Zionist.
Strong words.
Very. And they allege LBJ immediately eased the pressure on Israel, dropped the FRI investigation against the Zionist Council, stalled the NUMEC probe, basically allowing Israel's nuclear program to proceed without impediment, according to this narrative.
So the question the sources pose is, who benefits? Cui bono?
And their answer is quite broad. They point to the architects of the global war machine, the military-industrial complex, intelligence agencies like the CIA, MI6, Mossad, entities, they say, thrive on perpetual conflict and secrecy.
And the alleged consequences for the U.S.
Huge, according to them. The narrative claims the U.S. essentially lost its sovereignty. Its foreign policy became, quote, a tool for a criminal network, dragging the nation into disastrous war after another. They cite the attack on the USS Liberty, the invasion of Iraq as examples stemming from this shift. It's a really sweeping accusation.
So what does this all mean for you, listening to this? Well, the documentary and the blog post certainly weave a very compelling story. Highly controversial, obviously. connecting dots between these massive historical events, suggesting that maybe the world's critical moments aren't always what they seem on the surface.
Yeah, and if you take a step back, connect it to the bigger picture, it really raises a key question, doesn't it? In a world just flooded with information, with so many narratives competing for attention, how do you figure out what's truly driving major global events?
It really highlights how critical thinking is probably your most powerful tool when you're presented with claims this deep, this complex, especially about, hidden power struggles and agendas shaping history. Something to definitely mull over.
Okay, awesome. I hope you like that. Let me know in the comments section what you think about these little summaries, and hopefully it inspires you to want to watch the full documentary. And I hope you can see how it fits into current events so that you don't have to fall for the proof of weapons network, and you get motivated to understand how everything we've been told is a lie. And we can fight back with peaceful proof of work, boycott the Federal Reserve by owning Bitcoin in self-custody, boycott BlackRock by owning it in self-custody, and own more Bitcoin this month than the previous month. And we have seen that when you build wealth, economic wealth, you can head into diplomacy, and that's how you influence the system, and we influence change. And we do that by boycotting certain companies, by being conscious of our spending and not borrowing from the banks, avoiding debt, and being very conscious about how we spend so that their bottom line profits are impacted as you are building your wealth. And that's what we need everybody to do on a mass scale. And that's why I'd love you to help me share this content and get more people conscious, because I will keep going every single week until more and more people know how to transition to this world of Bitcoin, AI, and CBDCs, because I think we are running out of time and you need to prepare yourself years in advance. And I don't think everyone has years. So please share this with people that care, because I think we can see how this all is being connected into one thing. Right, let's do the final part of today. Now, what comes next? So we had the theater. There may be another few scenes. I'm not sure of every single step, but I'm pretty sure by following the money what the outcome is. The outcome is that eventually we enter into a negotiation, the final parts of announcing the negotiations. There may be a few things, but now essentially BlackRock and the GCC and their vast sovereign wealth that they built will be circling around like predators, like vulture capitalists, doing exactly what the colonizers have been doing all along. And they'll be looking, based upon the negotiation, to do distressed acquisition of some of the key assets. That will happen in the private equity sector, and they'll probably be partnering on different deals as well. It all depends on what the mix was in getting forward this. This is why the financial industrial complex is able to become more power than the military industrial complex, and the military needs to go to Europe to make back their profits as well. I believe that they negotiated this deal with the US government as proxy, and this leads to a military exit and a bank opportunity. And that's why I think this is different, because previously the military were in charge via Netanyahu, via Israel, and creating this colonial project of the Greater Israel Project, where they weaponized the belief that they were protecting the Jews to recruit an army, and they were demonizing the Muslims to say that we needed to have all these wars. And then they kept the profits by having a Congress that would take all of the AIPAC, military industrial complex, and financial industrial complex in order to push out an evangelical Christian narrative that confused people into thinking that Israel, the prophet, or the tribe of people that had a covenant with God, was Israel, the state, and therefore we must bless Israel and engage in ethnic cleansing and genocide and violate the Ten Commandments in order to usher in crimes against humanity that we've been witnessing in over the last 2 years. So what does Iran get? Iran needed the removal of sanctions and the ability to do its nuclear energy program without the need for nuclear weapons. Palestine needed to be decolonized, and that was what was needed in the agreement. And the US empire military colony needed to be vassalized into the GCC so that the GCC could have effective control over their neighbors. And their neighbors means that just like Singapore, you're able to build your way through strategic investment in order to become sovereign over time. And that is what I think the deal is with all the vassalite states. Iran, I think, agrees to eventually, stop supporting the need for resistance, because the need for resistance moves away and the resistance integrates into the political and military process of the relevant countries, knowing that the proxy covert wars and Operation Gladio and all of the Iran-Contra affair and everything that happened that I've covered in previous episodes goes away. And this is all in compensation. So what is the military doing? Because they negotiated their exit, they've agreed to take their profit somewhere else. So what did we have this week? NATO summit. And what did NATO summit do? Trump came along that was negotiating for Lockheed Martin, General Dynamic, and the German minister, and all of the different parts of the military industrial complex that are doing tariff deals with UK, Germany, EU, and America, said, guess what? We figured it all out. NATO, a sell strategy for the military industrial complex, said all of the NATO members are going to increase their budget from 2% to 5%. And so they will print more money, and the European Central Bank will print more money, and the Bank of England will print more money. And Keir Starmer, who works for the military industrial complex, say, we're defending democracy. And the European leaders will say, we're defending democracy. And all of a sudden, the money that the military wouldn't have made in the Middle East will be made back by printing money through this NATO expansion, and the profits will go up while the banks and financial institutions get to invest in the Middle East alongside the GCC, and we create a growth country because BlackRock's portfolio is now invested in BRICS and a multipolar world. And a multipolar world that came about because Trump implemented tariff policies, and through his tariff policies, the large corporations were able to consolidate more distressed assets and more distressed companies and profit from the volatility. The volatility that for hedge funds and private equity get to make a lot of money as the dollar is strategically weakened, and then usher in a technocracy through Palantir and the technical side of the complex of the proof of weapons network that gets to profit from issuing stable coins backed by the surveillance state social credit score, so that they can control the Western powers, the Western regions, as it vassalizes away from the people and does what it did with the technology that were beta tested in Gaza, beta tested in Ukraine, beta tested in UK, beta tested in the European Union. And we get to engineer civil unrest in order to usher that surveillance state, because you signed up for Patriot Act based upon an operation that killed 3,000 Americans in Twin Towers by the deep state for the profits of the military industrial complex that led to death and destruction to prop up the dollar through the International Monetary Fund. Welcome to the Proof of Weapons Network, land of the free, Western values, standing up for life, liberty, and freedom and protection of property rights, unless you're not American, of course. And then eventually we'll take the same tools and we'll do it against our own people. And you can opt out from the Proof of Weapons Network by saving in peaceful proof of work. So that's what I think is happening. And that's why I always want you to follow the money and get ahead of this. Because what immediately came out after these announcements? Well, immediately there was an announcement that came out from Trump that obviously after all the warnings and stuff like that, suddenly there was an announcement that Iran is allowed to export oil to China. And they're not going to enforce sanctions anymore. So essentially, Iran, in exchange for not hitting Qatar and doing it all in the agreed way, the reward for Iran was you can now export to China, and China can support your economy so that you can be supported, so that we can move to this world of sanctions being removed as financial weapons of mass destruction. And so now What happened? What was announced from Iran? Iran is determined to buy its defense systems from Beijing. And there was announcements that Beijing is coming over to Iran in order to build essentially its air defenses, which could be used for the second round of war, which is not going to escalate to World War III because everyone knows that this would happen and it would be mutually guaranteed destruction. But in order to push out the proof of weapons network, the Trump administration also came out and said that he's ready to give Iran $30 billion if it wants for a basically civilian nuclear program in exchange for easing sanctions and basically easing some of those freeze assets to bring Iran back to the negotiation table. That was their own frozen money, just as what will be happening with the frozen money in Russia, because that's always what the purpose of sanctions is covert operations in order to create chaos in the region, in order to opt people into the proof of weapons network. But but through the BRICS ties, combining with the GCC, Iran and Egypt joining, and now the GCC becoming at the center of the region, we've now entered into a multipolar world, and the US proof of weapons network is now fueling the profits of China's military industrial complex. And BlackRock manages its BRICS portfolio as Israel is being vassalized into the Gulf Cooperation Council, and the multipolar world order is being engineered, and all you need to do is follow the money. Reuters came out and leaked that there will now be a Gaza ceasefire. And what was the leak? It was a deal that was a lot worse than it should actually be. Basically, they were beta testing so that when they actually release the real deal, it actually looks significantly better. And I believe it will lead to a lasting ceasefire. And you will learn that the Proof of Weapons Network negotiates with genocide, death, and destruction to back up the dollar. And that's essentially what was being announced. Now, I was on a space where we discussed the terms of the deal. I'll just go through final thing to help you see that it's not going to be as bad as this. But they put out a leak from Reuters, and what they essentially said is they agreed to Gaza warfare determination. And in the agreement, I'll just read out some of the key points. Gaza hostilities will coincide. They will go in about 2 weeks. The ending conditions will encompass 4 Arab nations, including Egypt, the United Arab Emirates, to administer the Gaza Strip. Does that sound like similar to what I said? And then it said that they will be replacing the Hamas in terms of organization. Remember what I said all along? Hamas had already agreed on day 3 to step aside as part of the negotiations. They were telling you that it wasn't because they wanted to pretend that they were protecting the hostages. The Israeli families should be outraged. They will be outraged. That will cause civil unrest that will lead to the overthrow of the cabinet. And Netanyahu's been negotiating his exit with genocide. He'll probably get away with a lot. The Hamas leadership will face exile to other countries, essentially, while the hostages gain their freedom and will be returned. The other parts of the terms is that multiple nations globally will accept numerous Gaza inhabitants seeking emigration. This bit I don't think will happen. There will be no ethnic cleansing because Hamas will not agree with it, and Hamas will not agree with it until there is no ethnic cleansing. So that is the bad part of the deal, because the Palestinians are going to be on that land and Israel will be vassalized. And there is more chapters to this story that leads, I believe, the overthrow of the cabinet and a movement from a failed 2-state solution that may lead to a 1-state solution. These are a bit more speculative, but I believe you'll see announcements in terms of what Iran was negotiating, which I think it was BlackRock ports and slight parts of the Omani part of the Strait of Hormuz. Those are all speculation, but that's what I think the real negotiations were. And then suddenly we'll move to, it was announced in the leak that Abraham Accords expansion will bring in Syria, Saudi Arabia, and additional Arab and Muslim countries to recognize Israel and establish its official relations. I believe that this is put out there because the recognition will be Palestine as well. And then there will be civil unrest within Israel as a result of them not wanting a two-state solution and not wanting to peacefully integrate with their neighbors, that will then lead to probably eventually over the months and years ahead, a one-state solution. Israel, it was also announced in the leak that Israel would declare willingness for future, willingness for future Palestine conflict resolution under the two-state concept, contingent upon the Palestinian Authority reforms. The Palestinian Authority occupies basically the West Bank. It was a puppet government implemented by the West, but I think GCC wants to implement its leadership that will not bow down to Western interest. And so this will be talking points that will be still negotiated. It will say the United States will acknowledge limited Israeli sovereignty implemented on the West Bank. No, the West Bank illegal settlements will not be recognized. I believe that it will be Palestine that will be recognized. This is putting out the worst part of the deal, but this is designed to create the civil unrest campaign within Israel. And essentially, US via its proxy Israel will be... and so that's what's happening now. What is the final things that are happening right now? Let's get back to humanitarian head. I want you to understand how brutal the proof of weapons network is. For the last few days, we have seen an operation of humanitarian aid in both America. Is an American operation, and it's being implemented via its proxy Israel, and it is a Swiss company that has been doing humanitarian aid for the Palestinians. And every day it has been massacring Palestinians in the queue, which is essentially they're lining up in their cages in order to get some aid while Israelis massacre them during a starvation campaign. It's called the Gaza Humanitarian Foundation, GHF. You might as well call it the Gaza Holocaust Foundation. And today it was announced on Al Jazeera that the IDF admits that they shoot over 100 people and that they were commanded to do that by an IDF soldier that said that they do crowd control by killing people and doing direct flyers. This is a US-backed operation, and it is what I consider to be the last desperate negotiations from a falling empire. Now that essentially we are moving into the next phase. But this is how bad the proof of weapons network is. So, you know, we've got admissions there. This is literally massacres from US operations, killing people in a mass starvation campaign. This ceasefire cannot come soon enough. And I hope you've learned. I hope you've learned how these things work. And I said all along that what happens to them is beta test for what will come in the Western destabilization campaigns. So I want you to protect yourself, because what happened over there is a beta test for what will come over. And you know how I know that? I watched President Trump today take credit for the fact that there may be some kind of negotiations and peace negotiations between Rwanda and Congo. And if you've watched my previous episodes, you'll know that that peace treaty is only happening because Rwanda is a vassalized, colonized state for Western interest that funds terrorists like M23 to steal assets from Congo. And when they steal assets from Congo, they are literally pirated and sent over to the rest via Rwanda. And terrorism is used and funded M23 in order to steal and pirate those assets. And now, if we are getting a peace treaty between Rwanda and Congo, this means that the US is exercising decolonization in Africa as well, because BRICS has been investing in the global south. And if US proxies and Western proxies like M23 are exiting away, you bet that there's going to be exits from ISIS and Al Qaeda across the African nations as well. The US empire is decolonizing from the region, and the tools of deception of covert regime changes are going away. The US history book will be written, and it will look very similar to the British Empire and the violence that were happening there. So I look forward to seeing these changes. Multipolarity will be a much, much better result. And Bitcoin is ushering in the change as BRICS and the GCC and the various other countries and US Bitcoin strategic reserves are built. So build yours, and always remember, you are alive at one of the most interesting and exciting times in financial history. If you don't have this information, people will get wrecked. Others will do really well. So please like, share, and subscribe to my channel. Help me get to 100,000 subscribers. I think we're about 750 subscribers away, or whatever it is, to actually get in there. And join me at simondixon.com for the Bitcoin Hard Talk membership portal. If you want real-time updates, follow me on X and come up on some of my spaces. And in case everything gets censored, I'm backing it up on Rumble, so follow me over there. We want to do this with peace, love, and unity. The more people that understand about peaceful proof of work relative to violent proof of weapons, the better. So please share this. And I will see you this time next week for Bitcoin Hard Talk episode 88. This was Bitcoin Hard Talk episode 87. Does Israel control America? And the answer is they want you to believe that, because when they decolonize, they need plausible deniability, because Israel is a colony of America and the deep state that controls America and the military industrial complex that sits on top of it. Now you know, and you can debate me if you want, but watch Zionism be dumped as an ideology, because it's gone from the asset side of the balance sheet to the liabilities side of the balance sheet. And if you participated in that process by spreading truth, you helped save a lot of lives. And you're my kind of people, and I'd like you to be subscribers. And I look forward to seeing you this time next week